recognized symbol of excellence in sports entertainment.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson, and you're listening to My World. And of course, we couldn't do it without the Hall of Famer, the greatest professional wrestler of all time, your friend and mine, Double J, JArrett. Jeff, how are you, man?
Oh, Conrad Thompson. Howdy, folks. How you doing, pal? I'm ready to rock and roll today. Hope we get around to a topic. It seems like it's been, as they say in the South, a month of Sundays. But no, excited to sit down with you and record another episode of My World. Still lots and lots and lots of things going on in the Super Bowl. Super Bowl, in the world of wrestling and the Super Bowl, and just all around. Our football season has come to an end. I hope you don't make me pull that quote out that our friend Chris Park has actually quoted. I'll get into the Super Bowl that where I ranked on that coming off Super Bowl evening. So, Conrad, ready to talk a little wrestling, politics, no religion, but no. I don't even really want to talk politics. Politics and wrestling could be a hot topic, but I'll stay away from that too, pal.
Well, let's talk about the Super Bowl. You and I both thought the Chiefs were going to win. A dumbass running around in a mask is going to get punched square in his junk by Cody Angle as soon as we can.
Yes.
Said, if you think the Chiefs have a chance to winning, you don't know shit about football. LOL.
Direct quote.
I thought our buddy Top Dollar Who Hotta, AJ Francis, brought up a great point on social media over the weekend. Sunday night, he did a little selfie and he posted a social. Who really thought Brock Purdy was going to beat Patrick Mahomes? And apparently Vegas did. They were a 1.5 point favorite. And if you took a look at that game in the first half, you felt like, boy, the under is a lock, because there was no chance they were getting close to 46-47. Well, I'll be damned. In overtime, they did. Funny how that worked out. I had a bunch of friends who made a bunch of money, and I hope you guys did too. It's weird that football season is now over, but as we take a look, if you're watching on YouTube, we see Travis Kelsey in an embrace with his billionaire lady friend, Taylor Swift, your old pal, Tay-Tay.
My babysitter.
Your babysitter.
I'm kidding.
There's the tight end of the Chiefs hugging your babysitter, who put all of your kids in a music video like a decade and a half ago. Wow, just what a small world it is. You really are the Forrest Gump of wrestling, man. And I wanted to ask you, when you saw how the game finished, overtime, Taylor Swift's boyfriend wins, did you think of any famous Dutch Mantel quotes?
The first quote I thought of was my good pal, confidant, and podcast partner. And I used his quote. I said to myself, self, at the beginning of the year, when you saw the political involvement with the NFL and you see Tay-Tay getting involved and they have this little romance going, and then all of a sudden dive into some ratings and look at the female growth in the product. And I kind of go back over the last couple of years and see the Viacom and the kids version and how they're marketing to kids, and the slime and all that kind of stuff. And the wealthiest, most well-run, most profitable sports league in the world. I said to myself, self, Dutch Mantel once said about when reality TV had really taken off, we could go through bunches of different reality shows, Duck Dynasty, Kardashians, oh man, all of them. And he would sit back with an unlit cigar and he'd say, you know, fellas, I like my reality TV good and scripted. Let's just say the Patriots, when we won, they won when we were in war. The Saints won when we came back from Hurricane Katrina. And Kansas City Chiefs won to get that field demo up. And just like good wrestling promoters do, you got to leave them happy, Connie. You got to leave your audience happy.
Well, I don't know that everybody was happy, but it was a fun game. That's what I was hoping for. I didn't have it.
Not to go down that complete rabbit hole. I said last week on the podcast, you can't give Andy Reid, and I know Mahomes is great. I just don't think you can give Andy Reid 2 weeks. He's going to beat you. I think he's super, super good. What'd you think about Kelsey bumping into him on the sideline and how they downplayed that immediately? You didn't get into that?
Well, I mean, here's the thing. My parents were flipping out, and I saw it on a replay, and I was like, it wasn't that bad. I mean, he's frustrated. It's not like he tackled the guy. Yes, he tried to get his attention, but he's frustrated. But I just didn't think it was that crazy. I think you got to give guys a pass for playing with emotion.
Yeah.
I mean, now if he tackles the sumbitch, hits him with a lariat, he's running in with an RKO out of nowhere. That's one thing. But he caught an older fellow off balance a little bit because he wasn't expecting someone to touch him. But I didn't feel like there was any intent for harm or violence, just a little frustration. And I don't know. I give him a pass. What say you?
Well, here once, and if the reports are true, what I love about the whole thing was, I want, if I'm a coach, a 53-man roster? I want all 42 guys that are sitting on the sideline to be that animated and engaged. He wanted back in the game. That was the story was, damn, coach, I would have been in on that play. I would have been over there blocking the guy who stripped the ball or was around the ball. Maybe that fumble would not have happened, but at least keep me in the game. He was mad because he wasn't in the game. That was my understanding. So I definitely give him a pass on that. But man, did it make for some great drama.
Oh, goodness gracious.
Cody was asking, and then they got the remote and they rewound it. And like, what are they saying over there? So the story behind the story is captivating. And did the Taylor Swift over under about how many times she appeared on camera actually during the game? She broke the over, right?
I didn't look at that prop bet. I saw people making fun of all the prop bets. I even saw something that was getting passed around on social that was clearly not real as to whether or not Taylor Swift might have diarrhea during the game. It made me just laugh out loud at the absurdity of how people have become so celebrity obsessed. But I find myself talking to you about celebrities on this program since you and I recorded. We saw the WrestleMania kickoff press conference. It was unlike any press conference you or I have ever seen. I guess I kind of expected it to feel more like a UFC press conference. This was more like, I don't know, a segment on Monday Night Raw. We got a series of promos. I did enjoy the pregame hype, and we saw some talking heads out there like Big E and CM Punk and Pat McAfee. Of course, the master of ceremonies was Michael Cole. And I think we were left with more questions than answers, which is probably a good thing. I think they had like 16 different television episodes, plus a PLE and night one of WrestleMania before we get to night two. So there's a lot of runway here to tell a lot of stories that could go a million different directions. You've seen a lot of wrestling in your day. What'd you think of the press conference and the execution of what they tried to do there?
Well, I can't help but think just, the immediate thoughts that were going into my mind is, okay, it's Super Bowl week. They're in Vegas. They've rented T-Mobile. I thought, okay, so T-Mobile didn't have an event so I guess they didn't, but the setup obviously was fantastic. But yes, here and as the whole press conference went, I think they built the whole 20 minutes, 30 minutes, hour show. I know that, but I think they built it toward everything else was just, I guess, building the episodic. But the backstage interview when Rock and Roman went by and had the words with Triple H, didn't you think there's your story? That's the story you're going to see for the next however long, 6 weeks. I thought that was the whole, because they did the bloodline and I felt like they never really got anywhere. And I'm saying that's not a negative. That's not a detractor. I think by design, they were just kind of episodically throwing all this, and you'll probably have more context. I've been kind of out of the loop. I went and watched basketball this weekend, watched my daughter play, and died into all day Saturday hotel doing AEW business. So I've been out of the loop several days. But when I watched it, what was that, last Wednesday? Thursday. That's right, because you did the YouTube thing. Congrats on that. It was, what did they originally have laid out? Or was that it? I don't think so. It's episode.
Wait. You're not sure if that was the original plan? Here's the spoiler, Joe. It was not the original plan.
Did they alter? Let me just say that. What would it have been?
I don't think they anticipated that people would backlash and boo The Rock. I mean, that's probably, from the outside looking in, inconceivable. He's one of the biggest baby faces in the world. So he shows up, everybody's excited. They want to see him and Roman. Maybe the fans had a chance to think about it and thought, wait a minute. I think they got a million different options. And as a friend of mine likes to say, creative is subjective. What we do know is that one of those two nights, and if I were a betting man, I'd bet it would be night one, Cody will get his title shot against Roman. But there's plenty of story left to come. And there's a lot of story left to tell with Sting's last match.
Boy,
if you haven't already, check out tickets. I know you probably think they're sold out, and they might be right now. But it feels like every few days, a few more production kills open up. AEWTIX.com. You guys are hovering around the 16,000 seat mark. It's going to be one of the biggest shows in AEW history. And what a hell of a way to send off an icon. There's no other way to say it than Sting in his last match in the Greensboro Coliseum on Sunday, March 3rd. I won't be attending the pay-per-view, but I will be watching. You guys are going to be right down the street from my house here in Huntsville for his Go Home Dynamite and Collision, which randomly enough will both be done here in Huntsville, Alabama. I'm so thrilled to have the opportunity to attend that event, and I hope that you'll make plans to join me in Huntsville. Tickets in Huntsville are on sale right now. AEWTIX.com. I'm going to be there. If you're there, come say hey and chat me up about Sting's last match. But man, they kicked things off in a big way. You know, I know everybody knew this was going to be the last match, but I kind of hoped that we would see a little Ric Flair turn last week on Wednesday. Instead, Ric Flair wasn't even there. And Sting's very first shot at AEW Gold, another victory, another dub. Sting is now a tag team champion with his pal Darby Allin as the quote-unquote rub continues, as you said last week. But we saw something we usually don't see from Sting, a peek into his real life. Steve Borden's sons were front row. They acknowledged them before the match, and unfortunately, the Young Bucks acknowledged them after the match. They laid waste to the entire Borden family and Darby Allin. A lot of bloodshed, pulling their best Jim Cornette, all suited up in white and covered in the Stinger's blood. Man, what a visual. I dug it. Wanted to see what you thought about the way we're getting things kicked off for Sting's last match.
Well, you know my style. The episodic nature of any story, if you don't have that antagonist really up, I think when you look at any story in professional wrestling that's had even moderate success, your heels got to be standing tall. You got to, sometimes it all, I feel like I sound so cliche-ish or old school, but I mean, any story told since the beginning of time, you got to build, and the wrestling jargon is heat, but you can call it anything you want, but very rarely, I think, has, that type of impact. And I thought it clicked on every cylinder. I was happy to see it in so many ways. And Matthew and Nicholas leaning into the EVPs, and just the celebration afterwards. It felt like everything was breathing, and Sting's boys in there, and longtime Sting watchers, which we both are. We would have never called, hey, the boys are going to get their ass kicked. So well done. Absolutely well done. It was, and and they took an ass whooping.
Yeah, they did.
They took all four of those guys took an ass whipping from the Bucks. So I'll just say things are heated up, and the night in Greensboro, it's just building in a, you know, what do we have? We have 3, 4 to get there, 3 or 4 weeks to get there. It's going to be, you can't call it a one-man show, a one match show, because
There's 6 televisions between now and then, not counting Rampage.
I'm telling
So
you.
if you're counting Dynamite and Collision only, there's 6.
Yeah.
If you're counting Rampage, there's 9 episodes of TV. So I can't wait to see where this goes.
Yep.
I am really excited to see Sting, and well, I guess one of those collisions is preempted, so maybe it's whatever.
You're right, but
you
still.
get the idea. There's a bunch of shows, more than a half dozen shows, to continue to tell this story. And you know, I know that people are all. It feels like, man, if AEW decided, you know, that they were going to sign every free agent in the world and let them have the greatest series of matches in the world, there's still a contingent online who just hate everything AEW does. As long as you're watching, I don't think they mind. Just keep watching. But it is interesting to me that I don't think there's enough celebration of what Tony Khan is doing for Steve Borden. You know, I was here in the arena when Sting finished up with TNA. It was a 2-night Genesis. So he wrestled 2 matches in the same night. Once where the entire roster took turns beating the shit out of him with EC3, and once where Magnus did the exact same thing. And that was fine. We knew he was going to WWE, but it wasn't a great send-off for Sting in Huntsville for TNA. It wasn't a great send-off for Sting in WWE. I'm just glad third time's a charm.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like there's way more interest, and he's been handled with a lot more care. And I know that Tony Khan has his critics, but at the end of the day, Jeff, you can tell just based on the way that he's handled Sting this entire run, Tony Khan is just a massive wrestling fan like you and I.
Bingo. And you know, you said it, that third time's a charm. And you know, the TNA, I don't even think I was around for that night. But he was going to WWE, and at WWE, the injury, and you know, I don't even remember kind of how that whole relationship from a televised perspective, how that ended. But it was no pomp and circumstance. So I think in a way, the day Sting appeared on AEW television, in so many ways, it truly was the beginning of the end. When he appeared, you kind of knew that this is it. And so I think in a lot of ways, when the day the tickets went on sale, all those questions talked about that, not just the AEW fan base, but the professional wrestling fan base is eager to see a send-off, because it truly is. And that's, you know, when you get down into the promoter mentality, give them something that they'll never, ever see again. Well, this is it. There's only one send-off of a guy who's had a 30 to 40 year career that is iconic, and you're going back into the venue of Greensboro, where he really stepped onto the national scene, and so many things to go with it. It's just it pulls at the heartstrings, Connie. To me, if you're a wrestling fan, there is nothing not to like about it.
Well, there's nothing not to like about Manscaped either. You know, all of a sudden we saw that the Young Bucks have a new look. Maybe it's time for you to have a new look. Well, 2024 is here in full swing, and that means it's time for a New Year's resolution check-in with our friends at Manscaped. Newsflash, it's never too late to level up your grooming game and keep your bush tamed. Manscaped's new Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra is every man's cheat code to look good, feel good, dance all night. Woo! Wait, wrong one. And turn the page on confidence this year. Whether you're looking for a trim or that clean shaven look, this trimmer has you covered. It's trusted by more than 10 million men worldwide. And now is your time to get a grip on your grooming with our exclusive offer. Go to manscaped.com and use the code MyWorld for 20% off plus free shipping. The ball has dropped, but don't drop the ball on your balls. Introducing the MVP of 2024, Manscaped's 5th generation lawnmower. It's not just a trimmer, it's also your grooming sidekick. It has not one, but 2 skin-safe blade heads, a standard one for taking a little off the top, and a new foil blade to go smooth wherever your heart desires. Think of it as like having a personal stylist at your fingertips, or, well, wherever you need it. Did we mention it's also waterproof? A trim in the shower is the only way to start the day. And for the dudes who want the full grooming experience, they got you hooked up with the Performance Package 5.0. Inside the grooming kit, you'll get the lawnmower and the ear and nose hair trimmer. Even my wife likes that one. And how about the essential aftercare products, the Crop Soother Ball Aftershave Lotion and the Crop Preserver Anti-Chafing Ball Deodorant. Yeah, deodorant for your ball sack. Bet you didn't know you needed that. But Mrs. Silva is now letting Dave sleep in the bed again. He's no longer stuck on the couch, all thanks to that ball deodorant. As a gesture for the new year, they're even throwing in not 1, but 2 free gifts. You get the Boxers 2.0 and the Shed 2.0 toiletry bag. And how about this? A well-groomed you is here to stay. Unlike those resolutions that may come and go, Manscaped can make it happen for you. Get 20% off and free shipping with our code MyWorld at manscaped.com. Embrace a new you, and definitely embrace a new trimmer courtesy of Manscaped. So, Jeff, before we jump into talking about our topic today, which, this is a nostalgia podcast, even though I'll admit it hasn't felt like it the last few weeks, but hey, there was some major news going down. We're going to talk about Against All Odds 2009 today. But before we do, I felt like we should talk about some more recent Impact news. Kind of out of left field. It caught me off guard. Scott DAmore is no longer the president of Impact Wrestling / TNA. And I kind of assumed that was going to be his gig for life. They had all this momentum. It felt like they had just rebranded, had just such high remarks, excellent feedback, critical acclaim on their recent shows they did in Las Vegas. You got other stars who were recently departed from WWE, like Top Dollar, AJ Francis, and the former Dolph Ziggler, and Okada was at the freaking show. I mean, it was really, really amazing stuff, the momentum that they had. And now he's out. And the rumor and innuendo is a lot of the top talent there are not happy. Maybe those folks had opportunities to go to WWE or AEW, but they decided to re-sign with TNA because they felt like Scott had taken care of them and they knew their career was in good hands with Scott. But with Scott on the outside looking in, all of that comes into question. And I know you don't have any inside knowledge. You don't work there anymore. You're not a part of the organization, but you know Scott pretty damn well. And this is your baby, or once upon a time it was. What'd you think of that news about Scott DAmore departing Impact?
What did I think of Scott DAmore departing Impact? What day did that come out, Conrad? I'm just trying to think.
Last week.
Yeah, I know it's last week, but anyway, I had my phone was in my hand when I got a text that said, I can't believe this. What
Wednesday,
do you know?
Maybe it was Wednesday.
I'm not sure, but I can't believe this. What do you know? And I just responded just because I was actively either texting or scrolling. I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Oh, you can't hear it. And then anyway, so as you are well aware, yeah, I have a unique perspective on this, but I have no context where to go with this, at all. The all I can do is obviously share on my personal experience. And as I sat down and kind of drilled through everything and without knowing any of the details, and as things trickled out, you kind of hear, and I don't know what's true or not. But the one thing that was in there that he tried to buy it, and the reason I think tried to buy it, if this is true, is that he wanted to spend more money. I think up the budgets and all that. And obviously, I've shared this on the podcast multiple times, and I took full responsibility for my screw ups. But the reality was, from day one, when I look back on my time, is that I was under the impression that budgets were going to be bigger. There was going to be more of an investment, if you will, the strategies were going to be different. And so in a lot of ways I said, okay, that was in 2017 that we got together into 2016. We were basically finished by into 2017. So from 2018, it's safe to say, to 2000, beginning of 24, 6 years. I think you have to drill down into, I don't know the books, but the Asper family is very well to do, and they've made a lot of money through the years off of the television industry and cable and, you know, Access and Pursuit. And they did the merger a couple of years ago, or the acquisitions, and Steve Harvey got involved. All that with being said, it drills right down to, I don't know what TNA's true EBITDA, P&L, they're like the real financials. What does that really look like? Because it's obviously Lynn's sole decision, Lynn Astor's sole decision. So I asked myself, what did the profit and loss look like over the last 6 years? Because there's no way that you do the rebrand and you have, and maybe it's just internet, but it felt like the most buzz on the company in the last 3 years, 4 years. It feels like coming out of the pandemic, maybe longer than that. They had quite a bit of buzz. I said it a couple of, whenever we first reported on going back to TNA, what took them so long. I thought the Impact brand, just the timing of it all is very perplexing. That again, you don't ever judge a book by its cover, but I don't know what their financial picture looks like and the timing of it all. I'll say this: they've got their work cut out, no doubt. And nobody's irreplaceable. I mean, we're watching that right before our very eyes. Nothing, no talent, no executive, nobody's irreplaceable in this industry. That being said, what is their plan in place? Do you know? That's what I've yet to hear come out.
I forget the fellow who's taking his spot, but someone has
no,
his position. But
I know him. I worked with him back then, and I think he'll tell you right now, he is not a wrestling guy by any stretch of the imagination. And that he can be executive, and he is. But I just think at the very core, who is the wrestling guy? And I think that at the end of the day is that is an enormous component of who is steering the ship creatively.
well, it's going to be interesting to see how this shakes out.
Again, I wish him well. I mean, I don't know, but, you know, but it just surprised me of the timing of everything. And, you know, Scott had the gig, quote unquote, 6 years. So I don't know. What's that real reality?
What's the over under on when you think Anthem sells Impact?
Good question. Now, Connie, I don't think you asked that unless you, I mean, to me,
Jeff, you reckon they're making any money
here? So what do they value an hour on Access? Not just wrestling, any hour. What is an hour in prime time? There is a number, there is a metric that Access puts on an hour of programming. I don't know what that is. Not going to pretend to know what that is. And then you can just kind of extrapolate out from there. So wrestling can be produced relatively inexpensive. And so unless you know something I don't know, I don't see them selling.
No, I do not know anything.
Okay.
But the rumor is, we've heard for a while that they were interested in selling. I mean, that rumor's been out there. And there is an expression in business, you know, good money after bad. So if losses are mounting, it feels like eventually they're going to say, okay, that's enough. Or as Conan would say, that's enough. And it's a question of where does the thing wind up? And I don't have any inside information. I haven't really talked to Scott outside of I sent a well-wish support text and he responded in kind, but there's been no significant conversation. But something I don't think a lot of the wrestling community knows is this is not Scott DAmore's main business. Scott DAmore is a very successful, boy, I don't like to throw this word around, but financially secure. Let me say that. That's a PC way to say it. Individual. I tend to think that he may have an opportunity to wind up with this thing one day. Because I don't know that WWE would buy it. So I don't know why AEW would buy it unless they were trying to launch a streaming service or something like that. So
I'm going to, people have asked me this quite a bit over the last few days. And I go back to the conversation that I've had kind of multiple times. And I had, we'll call it this education. Conrad, I'm going to go well north. I'm not even going to say 100, 200, 300, 400 times. I don't know how many times I've heard this conversation from my father, from my grandmother, from Jerry Lawler, from different folks through the years. What are you buying if you buy, I'll call it Anthem Wrestling Exhibitions. That's the last known entity that I know. That's who I went in partnerships with. What do you?
Right. Oh, well, I would think you're buying the library.
Okay. What else?
Well, I mean, they probably got some rings. They probably got some production stuff.
Used.
Maybe there's some performer contracts. And I guess the question becomes, would they also include time on their television station?
Okay.
That's the big wrinkle, right?
Well, time on their television station is kind of by far the most valuable thing.
Sure, no doubt.
Because usually,
but how much is that really worth, if we're honest?
My point. That's my whole point. The library, and it's. I'm not saying, but I mean, it's, you really talk about, and thank God there are lots of folks out there that like to watch catalogs of wrestling, but the monetization of it comes from subscription services, which is small, and the WWE numbers, once you drill down on the real value of watching a 88 Starrcade or a 90, 95 Mania or whatever it may be, it's not near enough to sustain, an operation. So that it's looking, Jesus, you talking about him. And Karen and me had this conversation. She's like, because I've started reading stuff and people were calling me quite a bit, much more than I expected. And she would hear the phone conversation. She's just like, what, she has something. And I'm like, for whatever reason, starting that, the emotional attachment, the ups and the downs of all of it, I still have an affinity to it. So I'm very curious of where it's going to go. But unless, you can take any other network out there, they're just going to start their own. I'm curious to see. That's why I don't think they sell. I think it sits in Lynn Asper family until he's really ready to let go of that library. And to my knowledge, he wouldn't, because it's much more valuable to create content for his own networks. I don't know.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens.
It is.
I for one, don't think that this, I think it's inevitable that Scott DAmore winds up doing something in wrestling. And I, for one, see it.
Something I don't know. It's interesting.
No, I don't. But I'm just saying, like, the loyalty he has from a lot of those guys. As you know, my man wasn't doing this to pay the light bill. So He's doing it because he really loved it, and he makes a lot more money doing everything else in his life.
Yeah.
So
His family business, I like to say.
there you go.
I said he's got a family businesses.
Yes. So I'm just saying, realistically, every hour he spent away from that business on wrestling, he was losing money.
Yeah.
So clearly he's eat up with the bug. He's eat up with it.
Yeah.
And he can't shake loose of it. So I think he'll be back. It's a question of where does he land? And I think he'd have opportunities at AEW. I also think he'd have opportunities with WWE or a few other places, but it feels like he maybe wants to chart his own course if you're reading Mike Johnson's reports, because Mike even speculated that he tried to buy the thing himself, and I guess they decided they didn't want to sell. And I just think cooler heads prevail, and maybe if that was a no before, it turns into a yes with time. So here we are on February 12th recording this just before noon, and I'm going to say within the next 12 months.
Okay.
We see Scott DAmore doing something else, and he may or may not be the eventual owner.
Okay. I could buy that. Time. Yeah. Time is a funny, unique salve.
Well, yeah. I mean, once upon a time, you guys, I mean, you were standing across the courtroom from Scott. And then if we get a few years behind us, and then y'all are on stage cutting up at one of our Top Guy events or at adfreeshows.com. And I just, I don't think we're done yet. I think there's more to come, and I hope so. But, anytime money gets involved, things get a little weird, a little wonky. And that's why I'm here to help you at savewithconrad.com. Jeff, I don't know if you saw this, but recently there was a report where the Fed just announced that credit card debt has hit $1.1 trillion here in America. This is the nation's credit card debt is at an all-time high, but yours doesn't have to be. Now, here's a little secret. Your home value is still likely higher than when you bought it. I just talked to a family 2 weeks ago who thought for sure they were underwater because they bought at the height of the market in 2021. Nah, they had $150,000 worth of equity. They didn't even realize. We didn't know that until we got their appraisal, but I told them, I think you're fine. So why not put that equity you've built to work and use it to pay off those high interest rate credit cards? That's what we can help you do at savewithconrad.com. I'm talking to you if you've got credit card debt. Maybe you put Christmas on a credit card. Maybe you're feeling stuck making minimum payments. Man, I'm going to tell you, not only is it going to jump your score way up when all of a sudden your utilization of credit goes way down, but the peace of mind of knowing we are out of credit card debt. I mean, you know what the interest rates are on those. What's your rate? 28%, 31%. I've seen rates in the 30s, and that's way too high. Not only that, it's not tax deductible, whereas the interest you pay on a mortgage is tax deductible. So if you could get a lower monthly payment, get rid of all your credit card debt, get a greater tax deduction. And did I mention you skip your next 2 house payments? That's right. If you haven't already, you don't have to make your March or your April payment. You're done until May 1st. And come May 1st, how much are you going to be saving each month? We're routinely helping our podcast listeners save $500, $600, $700, even $800 a month. How much can you save? Find out right now for free and let my team at savewithconrad.com run the numbers for you and see what's possible. You don't need perfect credit. You don't need money out of your pocket. And at savewithconrad.com, we don't say no. We say not yet, but here's how. Even if you're looking to get out of that apartment and into a house, I've got down payment assistance programs. Yeah, you can still buy a house with no money down in 2024, and I can help at savewithconrad.com. Or if you're old school and want to talk to a live person, you can talk to us at 888-425-0105. Give us a call toll free, 888-425-0105, or get a quick quote right now at savewithconrad.com. NMLS number 32416, equal housing lender, savewithconrad.com. Jeff, it's not all good news. We got some bad news last week. You wound up being in Huntsville doing a little press and a little media, seeing our man Carl down at WAFF and some of my pals over at WHNT. And
had a grand old time in your backyard.
Shout out to the Brooklyn Brawl. I mean, Jack Spade over at the Rocket. It was a fun visit, and we got to hook up at Longhorn and share a meal together, and you got to do man versus food. It was really impressive. But
Cassie
what
is regular.
he got his usual. By the way, boys and girls, here's what Jeff had. Just to recap, Jeff had a salad, and he also had a little bread. He had a steak. He had a baked potato. He had a sweet potato. He had some asparagus. He had some broccoli. Did I miss anything? I feel like there's one more side.
Oh, God, would you stop it?
It was really impressive. I was so happy to see you knock it out. But it was ironic because we both woke up to the news that morning that we had lost Toby Keith. And when I think about Toby Keith and you, I think about your very first TNA show here in Huntsville, of all places. That's really the first and only time Toby got involved in wrestling. He was doing this concert on the stage. You're a jerk and you interrupt it. And he inserted himself in the battle royal, gave you a big suplex. It all happened here in Huntsville. And on the day we learned of his passing, you were back in Huntsville promoting wrestling. Man, it was pretty ironic. But even around town, I don't know that you saw it that day, but I've seen them all over town since. There's a series of digital billboards that are paying tribute to Toby Keith right here in Huntsville, Alabama. Not in Oklahoma, but here in Huntsville. And I just thought, man, what a legacy that guy leaves. And you didn't just know his music or know him from a wrestling standpoint. You're his real life friend. I wanted to give you a few moments here to talk about your pal, Toby.
Oh, boy. We could have maybe saved this till the end. Yeah, I put on Instagram, no coincidences, only convergences. Just Conrad talking about Toby gets so much emotions going with, because our relationship, but also just in a lot of ways, I looked up to him in so many ways in how he conducted his life, how he, his business acumen, his simplicity of things, and really his outlook. The comments that he made in his final days, a month or two out, he's like, "Hey man, I've come to grips. I'm not going to let cancer define me. I'm doing what I can do, and I'm going to live my life." The way I believe I'm getting the quote wrong. The way he was okay with passing, and he said, "Folks without faith don't have that," and that is what resonated over the last week with me. It's how eloquent he could just kind of put it into the most simplistic words. People without faith, they don't have that.
Right.
That to me is like, well, don't have what? Well, we don't have enough time on this podcast to really go through that. But man, all the fun times and the different stories, and there's a whole nother story, Conrad, that I won't tell on this podcast. That picture that y'all showed of me on the bus, and Karen, you see the red Solo cup in my hand, Conrad. So that's just the tip of the iceberg. But all the good times and the Huntsville story and everything that went into that story is deep. Him, that song coming out of the war, or starting the war, 9/11 happened in September. He wrote that song, and then 2002, as he's going out on tour, he writes this. He wrote it, and that was going to be his anthem, but he had no idea. And he says that how divisive and just everything that went with it. But then he got the invite and said, "No, I can't go be at the White House." And of all folks, some folks could say, "No, I can't make my White House gig." But if you know Toby, I mean, he loved his country. So patriotism, it's definitely no secret. It's the very top of it. But he made a commitment, to his buddy that I'm coming to perform, and he did. And then, going through the ups and downs of TNA, and maybe that was, I don't know, 2012, 11 or 12, because he had kind of referenced, why don't we go buy that thing back? Is he really serious about that? And then as we got into that part of our relationship, and me dealing with, I'll just say, his attorneys and his business folks, and then you really begin to understand the kind of businessman he is. And again, going back to integrity and the simplicity, and he's $1 billion guy that started off of literally writing songs, comes to Nashville, and he tells his wife, they may not like my singing, but I know they're going to like my writing. And so his core to his heart is being a singer-songwriter, but then building an empire of racehorses and golf course. And just business after business after business. But he wanted to get into wrestling because, he saw the opportunity. But then when essentially the Carters wanted to do it without me and bring Toby in, he's just like, no, Jeff's my guy. And so those kind of things defined to me like, wow, this guy, he is different.
Yes.
He is, you ain't going to buy him off. You ain't going to do it. He that's why I said, I'll never have a friend like Toby.
Right.
Just there was no hidden agenda. So waking up to that text, that hurt, just because, man, life is so fragile. My God. So fragile. He just did a show. He was getting offers coming in. Was it going to be a residency in Vegas? Was he going to go back on tour? Just all the things and how he lived his life. A true, we throw this term around, but man, an icon in the country music world. But as far as friendships, just incredible. Never met anybody like him. What a great friend.
I don't think we can top that. We're going to give Jeff just a minute here to get some shit together. I hate to do it this way, but we're going to take a quick break here and remind you guys that we have an affiliate partnership with Fanatics. They're the world's largest collection of officially licensed fan gear. If you're looking for some Chiefs swag, maybe you still want to love on those 49ers, maybe you just want to support your home team. Well, when you go to shopsportsmerch.com, you're supporting our home team here on My World. We greatly appreciate the support. We're partnering with Fanatics here, so it's the same great swag that you would see, your favorite jerseys and caps and shirts and jackets and hoodies, and all of that with Fanatics is now available through our affiliate partnership at shopsportsmerch.com. Now, to be clear, it doesn't cost you anything extra. Same great Fanatics products and services, but it actually helps us and supports us here on the program. So if you're digging what we're doing and you're going to buy something anyway, buy it from shopsportsmerch.com. If you're watching along with us on YouTube, hit that QR code that's up on the screen now, or check out the description below for today's episode. We'll have the link there. That's shopsportsmerch.com. Jeff, I hated to transition out of that into a commercial. I just wanted to give you a minute because I knew I sprung that on you, but I knew that if we didn't talk about Toby, it wouldn't be doing a service to your friend. And
well, I appreciate that. Seeing the picture of him and Cody just got to make you smile
yes.
in so many ways. And just the tributes. There's Cody. That's the back of one of his places out in Oklahoma. Just look, he said, Cody, put your fist up. And that's a picture that I'll certainly always cherish. If you're watching on YouTube, if not, go to YouTube and see Toby and Cody. Just put a smile on your face. Old Codes had a tough night last night, Conrad, to get me in a better frame of mind. Bless his heart. Speaking of Fanatics, get that promo code my world or whatever our promo code is, because Cody went from a Chiefs jersey to a 49ers
Oh, wow.
jersey. He, we did that Super Bowl with a friend of the show that puts it out every year, and there's folks in there, all the different prop bets. Connie, I came in number 2. I was in second place out of, I don't know, almost 40 folks. But Cody, first quarter, you hit refresh, second quarter. So he went from being in third place to 20 to 30, back to 3, depending upon how the game and his picks were. So had a lot of fun last night. Oh, Cody, I don't know what he's going to do out of football season, because his jerseys will stay hung up for the next 6 months. But all good, pal. I appreciate you giving me a little break. It's
well, listen, I know that, I get eat up online about us having too many commercials and putting them in at the improper place. But I'll be honest, I didn't know that this would be an emotional thing, but I have empathy for my friend, and I don't want to, I just want to give you a minute there. And I thought, hey, let me take a little break, and then we'll talk about our topic. You're right. I probably should have saved that for the end. My bad. I learned a lesson. If I know,
you know what, my emotions have gone up and down. I mean, when I think of all the fun times, like, I don't like to drop names on there without asking permission, but there's some folks in my past that, anyway, we've had a lot of times with Cody, and with Toby, and he texted me and talked about, hey, remember that time that on the bus and they were passing around that moonshine? And I'm like, oh boy, yeah. We've got a mutual friend, Connie. I'll just say that he had a couple of sips on the moonshine. He had to get off the bus, and he went down, and not far from the bus, but he just went down and sat down on this curb that couldn't have been comfortable. But let's just say he sat on that curb for a good 30 minutes. I just say that moonshine was a little stiff for him. So there's so many good times I had with Toby too, but the life lessons and the friend he was, that did get me emotional. But obviously, I'll wrap it here. I've had a blast with Toby Keith through the years.
We had a blast talking about him at Longhorn, and it was all positive, fun, happy. So I didn't expect that, and certainly didn't mean to throw you a curveball, but I'm glad that's what I like about doing a show with you, man. You're just you're honest, you're open. And I think that's what makes this podcast such a great listen. I hope if you guys are listening, you'll hit the subscribe button and you'll tell your friends about one of the more honest wrestling podcasts out there. Let's talk about why we're here. Damn it. Let's talk about Against All Odds 2009. We covered Genesis last month, and the Torch has a report on the fallout from that match with Sting. TNA World Champion Sting was struggling to get around during and after his Genesis match with a knee problem. Multiple reports are that he underwent surgery on both knees last month, and there's been some consideration to taking the belt off him, since it's become painfully obvious that he can't work pay-per-view caliber title matches. His latest injury fuels speculation that he's nearing the end of his in-ring career. This is 15 years ago, y'all. He's insisted on signing a series of one-year contracts with the company since he started working with them, and the assumption of people within the company is that they're building towards his retirement later this year. The company had discussions last year about a possible retirement for Sting at the end of 2008 after being inspired by the send-off WWE gave Ric Flair. However, he opted to sign another one-year deal with the company. It's pretty crazy to think, man. 15 years later, it's finally happening. Were you guys, does that sound right? You guys were inspired by the job WWE did with Ric Flair and thought, let's do our version with Sting here?
You know what? I think everybody in the industry at the time watched the Flair Orlando send-off, but, everybody, different opinions, but there's also, there's only one Ric Flair, but there's also only one Shawn Michaels. That match was beautifully crafted, if you will, right down to the 1, 2, 3. But Sting was in a different position, and I'm sure there was some chatter, but I'd have to go out back and specifically ask Sting, but I know that he was having knee issues. and on both knees. And look, 15 years ago, he'd still been wrestling 25 years. And his first original bad surgery, Conrad, you may know this from Shivani podcast, but when he ran down to the ring and jumped up on the cage to climb it, he had a patella tendon tear. And I remember kind of having the conversation that he said, he came back from that, but he said the part of his body that had always kind of given him issues through the years were knees. He's a former basketball player, everything that went with that. So it was a year by year basis in not just from his physical health. It's just, did he want to do it? And that's where it's pretty cool to see that, had the TNA situation maybe ended differently, I don't know, or if the WWE situation would have ended differently, probably more appropriately, he might not have been incentivized to say, you know what, I want to go out on my own terms. But God bless Sting and AEW that we do get to see a send off in his own way. But here we are talking about something that happened 15 years ago, and him coming off the event. That was the Charlotte event, Genesis. I'll remember it for multiple reasons. But yeah, the Mafia was really, really rocking and rolling. And Sting was right in the middle of all of it. And he carried the banner well, but his health was an issue.
We should talk about Christy Hemme here for a minute. She had 2 herniated discs in her neck, and they think it happened on a television taping in December. And she was told to get surgery. So she goes and gets a new procedure, which it's called a neurocranial alignment. This sounds crazy, but I guess they had rods shoved up her nose and into her head, and then they blew up a balloon to move the bones into her spine, which she was told would align her entire body. And she said when they were done, she was an inch taller and her scoliosis was taken care of. The original idea was, let's remove some pressure off the discs and maybe she could heal without surgery. And I guess you guys were anxious to get her going again. And tell me about this, man. This is anytime you have a herniated disc or some sort of spinal injury, this is a big deal. But I've never heard of this type of surgery before. What can you tell us about Christy Hemme and her injury here?
When I read the notes, I remember vaguely kind of the ins and outs of it. But as far as Christy goes, I can remember, I'll call it day one, when she came, is that her enthusiasm, she wanted to get in there. And in her words in those days, I want to take the bumps, Jeff. And I'm like, Christy, you have got unique charisma. You can talk on the mic. You don't have to do all this, because I wouldn't say that she is, she's athletic, but she's not, she's, I don't want to say skinny. I don't know what the words I'm looking for. Petite, I think may be the words. I was just like, why does she want to do this? We've got a role for her and a lot of upside, but she doesn't have to take all the bumps. And man, she just wanted to do it, Conrad. And I remember in my house when Dutch, I don't think he brought me the news, talked about it. And he said, man, I think her neck's pretty damn bad. We need to be careful. I'm like, in my mind, I went, yes, we sure do. She's too petite. The bumps are hard on folks. And I don't think she's long for taking all these bumps. But it was, she wanted to do it. And then talking about that surgery, but I remember it being successful.
We got to talk about New Japan after the Tokyo Dome show. You have 3D as now the IWGP Tag Team Champions, and your Motor City Machine Guns are the Junior Tag Team Champions. And it's reported that New Japan is actually hoping for more exposure here in America. What was the TNA relationship like with New Japan in this era for you to have 2 tag teams holding both of their tag belts?
I think that literally says it all, because you look and, this is Q1 of 2009. And I think of how quickly Dixie and Russo, and I'll just say the powers that be, just completely decimated the relationship. And how unfortunate was that. It's okay, they didn't see the vision of it, but I guess they didn't care about the financial side of it. But when New Japan puts not one set, but two sets of tag titles on contracted TNA talent, I think that says so much about it. And Kurt was going over there and they saw real value. Here we are 15 years later, and New Japan in the American market, they've got a show coming up, and they're growing and everything, but going back to these dates, they wanted to break into the US market, and we were more than happy to create a reciprocal relationship and a talent exchange. They talk about forbidden door. We didn't call it that back then, but I mean, 3D and Motor City Machine Guns to be there, both sets of their tag champs, says a lot. And, it's one of those, Connie's, what could have been.
Let's talk about what was with a couple of agents. It's reported in the Torch that Savio Vega is going to be the agent for the Knockouts division, and that BG James has recently been agenting a lot of the important matches, whether it's the X Division title match or the 6-man main event on pay-per-view. And Wade even writes, James is considered to be natural by many to be a natural in the agent role. Unlike many of Jeff's friends who have jobs in the company, he is seen as someone who's right for the job. So some high praise for BG James. We know these days he's a high-ranking official with WWE, and once upon a time wrote the whole shooting match for SmackDown. I mean, he's certainly proven himself to be very valuable behind the scenes. But you were probably one of the first people to give him that opportunity. What can you tell us about Brian as an agent and Savio Vega as an agent for the company as well?
So I'll do Savio first. Savio is a guy that I'll say the wrestling world didn't know his background before Quang existed, and Savio was Quang in the WWF when he first came in the mid '90s, and then he changed into Las Barricas with Savio Vega. Before that, he was a young, incredible talent in Puerto Rico, working for Carlos Colon. But literally from day one, he was a main eventer, and he finished, we'll call it, his WWF career, and then went back to his home country, Puerto Rico, and him and Victor Quinones, and they started a promotion. So Savio's a guy that always thought big picture and ran a very successful promotion. And I'll say that totality of it, not just a talent. So Savio always knew how to look, or he's a big picture guy, and kind of had that mindset from the day I met him back. Gosh, that was late '80s, early '90s in Puerto Rico. And then Brian, he I met him, and his both Scott and Steve had worked in the Tennessee territory, but literally day one, as the roadie came on the scene, Brian always impressed me, like as he was formulating what the roadie character and how the roadie character, his ideas that I'm quote unquote the wrestler and he's the second, but we collaborated on stuff literally day one. He's always thought that way. And then as he got going, and then when I came back in the DX days, he's always thought big picture, had a vision. He understands that, yes, the in-ring stuff is very important, but we got to figure out music and entrance, the ins and outs, the presentation from A to Z. So it's when you see a commentary, a report from Wade Keller or Metzer or whoever during like, hey, he's right for the job. It's something that, it's like, yeah, he's been right for the job for a long time, and he's had his demons like myself and others. But a lot of times, and Brian used to say this, on his worst day, he's pretty damn creative, and he was. But clear-headed, he is fantastic. Always has been really, really good at seeing the presentation of professional wrestling as a entertainment product.
It's great to see, his story, unlike some others in wrestling, be a happy ending and a happy story.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about your story. They're going to release here on April 14th, 2009. It's announced here. They're going to put out a 4-disc, 12-hour DVD. It's a whole set called JArrett, King of the Mountain, and it chronicles your entire wrestling career. I guess you guys worked with Jim Cornette to use some of his wrestling tapes, and it showed, some candid sit-down interviews on his life and career in TNA wrestling, some guest commentary, some rare photos. Was this a fun project, or is it more fun for you to work on projects about somebody else rather than yourself?
That you said it. You kind of dove into it. So I'll say end of 2007. So Kurt came on. Whenever Kurt came on, and we've talked about this, I knew that as far as me being we'll call it the lead horse, those days were long gone. And Don West approached me and said, "Man, our DVD business is really, really good." And it, TNA had built through the years a substantial DVD business, and he came and he said, "I've got this idea that we need to do something out of the box. We need to do, what you call it, a 4-disc set." But he said, we really need to invest in this and do sit down interviews and this and that. And Don had visions of doing even more and interviewing different people and all that. And even some folks at one time, he's like, "Man, if we can get WWE to cooperate." And I'm like, "That ain't going to happen." But, he wanted to do kind of a complete, now, as crazy as it may sound, me and him both at that time, Conrad, had kind of looked at, okay, I'm not officially retired, but my in-ring days are definitely full-time in the rearview mirror, or so we thought. And so he wanted to really drill down on making a complete set. And he said, "I really think this can be a hell of a seller for him." Like, "Okay, Don, you can sell anything." He said, "No, this will have something with the DVD stores that we can charge a little bit more for it." And, back in those days, we were in Best Buy, and it's crazy how things have evolved, but he had high hopes for it, and it delivered for him. But he really wanted to do a complete set. So this is a Don West vision from A to Z. This is a Don West deal.
Let's talk about the movie The Wrestler. It's picking up some steam. Mickey Rourke is going to win a Golden Globe for his role in the movie. I said Golden Globe. It's a Golden Globe. What did you think of the movie? I know we've touched on it before, but this was a big deal to wrestling folks, and certainly gave a look into one version of an aging superstar, a former superstar's life. But a lot of people felt like it was negative. Other people felt like it was spot on. I know you're not a movie guy, so I doubt you went and saw it in the theater. What'd you think?
But I remember we did a podcast not long ago, and I'd like, "Oh no, I didn't watch it. I was distracted." I remember. So I've been in the theater twice. In the UK, we did sit through it. I did watch it with Mick and others. And I think you just said some people looked at it as negative, some people as spot on. I'm going to say yes to both. It's kind of the underbelly of professional wrestling, in that, the hybrid of being, we're not true sport, and we're not, all entertainment, if you will. We're kind of that rock and roll hybrid form. We don't have seasons, hearing Toby comments over the last week, when you kind of hear out, he never took a year off. He made an album every year, toured every year, just kind of his grind, but he would really go hard from March till about September of October. So he had the winter off. But the underbelly of our business is, there's retirement plans and unionized and all that kind of stuff doesn't exist. So, Randy the Rams are real. It wasn't that his name, Randy Ram, or
Randy the Ram. Yeah.
Yeah, they're real. I mean, it was didn't exactly put professional wrestling in the greatest light.
The WWE is going to go through some cost cutting here in 09. Ron Simmons, Bob Holly, Val Venus, Stilo Brown, Sergeant Slaughter, all these guys are out, including a future Sean Spears in developmental, Tim White, Jim Corderas, Mickey Henson, Mike Posey. Victoria would also go on to announce her retirement as well. Were any of these people on your radar for TNA immediately?
It's funny that as we report on this, again, it's post WrestleMania or coming up, and historically speaking, that's when the WWE always
Resets.
And it's like the Jack Welch mentality of GE. You know, you let go of your bottom 10% producers, period, every year. Keep the turnover. My dad was a huge proponent in that. He just didn't believe in keeping the roster the same. Almost never. He always liked having, hey, new kid on the block, like every month. I think there's a lot of validity to that to this day, in a lot of ways, to keep things fresh. But you went through the list there. A guy like Tim White, who was Andre's driver, maybe they did a reorg of their refs and whatever it may be. So anybody specifically on that, you would have to go through that again. But every year when that list would come out, you would for sure take a look at it.
We ought to talk about Moondog Cujo. He passed away here, and we've covered the Moondogs a little bit in the archives. Did you keep in touch with the Moondogs at all?
So Lanny lived up in Kentucky, was from Kentucky. He was, so some folks may, who are you talking about? Moondog Cujo. That was cousin junior of, am I right, Conrad? I think cousin junior of Plowboy Frazier, Hillbilly Jim,
cousin junior is correct. Yes.
Of the WWF at that time, the Hillbillies, if you will. But man, he came in to USWA, and as Larry was going through different partners, Bill Smithson, who's passed away, he was Spike. Anyway, there was a bunch of Moondogs. So yes, the ones local, and Richard Lee would always keep us in contact, but it was sad. Lanny's young guy. I mean, how old was he when he passed? In his 40s? He was young. Tragic.
48 years old.
Big dude that could move his ass off. God, he could work. He was so good.
The impact.
Just real quick, Lawler used to say, Lanny, your work's too good to be a Moondog. You got to be a lot more stiffer. You got to be a lot more reckless. Anyway, Lanny's a great dude. A lot of fun to work with him.
So let's talk about the ratings here, because coming off of Genesis, you guys do a 1.17 rating. That's 1.8 million viewers. That's the second biggest audience in the history of the show. Now, that's not enough to beat Raw. It's not enough to beat SmackDown, but it does beat ECW. This momentum, you can, with the benefit of hindsight, how much of this do you contribute to the success of the Main Event Mafia storyline? Quite
a bit. I mean, when you drill down, and the luxury of doing this podcast and really taking a overview, a 30,000 view look at it, for me, the thing that continues to kind of jump out, because we all follow ratings, and I believe the Super Bowl this year is going to be the most watched program in American television history, because now I think they can really drill down and get bars and restaurants and the stream, who's streaming what, and really get a number around it in so many ways. But when I look at doing 1.8 million people, and you just said, okay, Raw is doing probably 3 million at this time, 4 million at this time on USA Network. That, to me, the big thing that jumps out, we were doing 1.8 million people on a network that probably averaged, and I'm talking Spike, great partners at Viacom, but their network was a top 25 or top 30. So their network cume, like the average program on Spike was, in those days, maybe 600,000, 700,000, maybe 800,000. So we're more than doubling the network average. That is something that I look back on and go, okay, the Main Event Mafia was rolling. Because it was 5 established stars first and foremost, and then the second was they were involved in a storyline with across the fence from them, as we say, the front line, AJ Styles, Samoa Joe. I mean, we could go through that Team 3. We could go through that list. The story was there as well in a big way. So yes, Main Event Mafia being in a story was a huge part of the success.
We know that Dave Meltzer was not always thrilled with these shows, but clearly the audience is into them. The show opens with the Mafia coming out and bragging about all the people that were their victims. Here comes Hernandez to cash in his briefcase for the title match from Feast or Fired. The match goes 4 minutes when Booker and Angle interfere before it turns into a heel beatdown. And eventually the baby faces come out, and it ends with Bubba powerbombing Kurt through a table. Team 3D is going to challenge Sting and Kurt for a match at Against All Odds. Not a tag match, though. Devon's challenging Angle, and Bubba is challenging Sting for the title. And Wade Keller wrote this. I'm not even sure people really care to see them anywhere past mid-card these days as a tag team. TNA really lost its way when they stopped promoting young guys, besides from Angle, the older guys provide mediocre main event matches and make the match and the company look secondary. It's a broken record, but they were doing more buys on pay-per-view on FSN than on Spike, with 200,000 viewers per week instead of 1.5 million, and with far more star power now. The difference is they just don't produce great pay-per-view shows. And this mentality that the only stars are the guys from 10 years ago handicaps you to death. A sprinkling of older guys on top mixed in with younger guys works, but somehow they lost their way. And I got to tell you, at the time, I'm sure you took great issue with that, but when I read that, it does feel like a fair assessment from the outside looking in. If you were selling more pay-per-views with 200,000 viewers than you are with 1.5 million, and you have more star power, how do you reconcile that, Jeff?
Oh, Cotty. How do I reconcile pay-per-view buys versus television ratings?
Well, I'm just saying you had more buys at 200,000. When you grew the audience by a multiple of 7, you sold less pay-per-view. So Wade says that must mean you're not producing good pay-per-view. That is a logical leap that I can make.
No, and don't think we didn't have these discussions.
Yeah.
I mean, without question, how were we doing more buys?
Right.
And then it kind of goes back to, did we fully commit to say we're going all in on ratings because that's what Spike's going to pay us? Because Wade referenced on Fox Sports, that was a different mentality that we wrote Fox Sports to create buys, period. We were paying for the time. It was a whole different business model. So once we got on television, can't serve two masters. And we, when you really look back on it, we didn't serve either one of them as well as they should have been, because we did have to build toward a pay-per-view. And twice a year we would fully commit. But maybe the other 8 to 10 months, we would say, no, we need to get ratings, because that's the only way they're going to re-up us with a healthy increase, if you will. So, no, the argument that Wade or Dave or anybody else online, we were very aware of that. Unfortunately, nobody during that time, including me, made the decision, hey, let's go from 12 to 4 pay-per-views, or even 6. I mean, we've talked about this on there. Just think if we would have gone from 12 to 6, how that would have changed so many things to me. I just think every pay-per-view would have felt bigger, as opposed to, and I'm using others' words, just another episode of Impact that we're asking people to pay. We didn't ever write it or craft it that way, because they were 3-hour shows and blah, 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 blah. But yeah, Connie, tough, very, very tough.
The Sarah Palin skits are continuing here with the beautiful people. Lethal and Creed are now a tag team calling themselves Lethal Consequences. They're going to beat Morgan and Abyss to get a tag title shot at Against All Odds. Meltzer would say that it looked ridiculous with the size difference and there were timing problems. But as a reminder, these are two very talented performers. We know Creed these days is known as Xavier Woods, and we know what Jay Lethal's up to. Mick Foley is going to appear for a few minutes. He's going to do a promo putting over AJ Styles before the main event because he's going to be out here taking on Scott Steiner. And the main event of the show, Steiner and Styles, goes 15 minutes. And Meltzer's pretty critical, saying Steiner blew up early and Styles at least carried him to a slightly below average match. It was an ugly spot where Steiner went for a belly to belly and couldn't get Styles over. So Styles landed on his face. Steiner whispered, "My fault," and they continued. Styles did a stinger splash in the corner. Earl Hebner got in the middle, and he got taken out. Foley comes down. Steiner hits Foley with a pipe, and then he hit Styles with a pipe, but Styles still kicks out. Foley distracts Hebner. Petey Williams comes in, comes off the top of the missile drop kick on Steiner, and Styles used the Pele kick on Steiner for the pin. Styles and Williams are celebrating as the show ended, and the finish was good and that it put Williams in a spotlight position. He's just been used as a jobber to the stars, but one would think that there's not much point to this if that's the way they're going to continue this. I know you and I are big Petey Williams fans. He had arguably the most innovative move that anybody had seen in decades when we saw the Canadian Destroyer. These days, of course, everyone uses it. But I loved his stuff with Scott Steiner before, and the idea that he's going to come out and drop kick Scott Steiner in support of AJ. This is fun stuff. What'd you think of Petey and the execution here?
Well, Big Papa Pump and Little Petey Pump. It was, I don't want to draw this analogy, but I think you'll know where I'm going with this. Sting and Darby have a kind of a unique chemistry. Well, backstage, unique relationship, unique chemistry. Backstage, obviously Scott is into working out and then building his body through the years. So was Petey. I think Petey, when he got away from wrestling, what did he do? He's a personal trainer. So they had a good relationship, I'll call it, on bodybuilding to begin with. But my point being is they had a real life relationship backstage, which I think is necessary for their chemistry. I thought they had great chemistry on camera, and I thought it played well. That picture when he bleached out his goatee and his look and all that, it was they were an entertaining duo. I thought, very entertaining.
You're going to get into an argument with Booker T at a TV taping. This is all from the Torch. Jarrett had a reputation for micromanaging certain aspects of the product, particularly overseeing matches. He stepped on the toes of agents by directly getting involved in laying out some of the matches, and he laid off for a while, but observers say he's overseeing the matches more closely again. Jarrett got directly involved in an angle that Booker was working on, and it rubbed Booker the wrong way because he felt he should have been given more leeway as a veteran of the locker room. Words were exchanged, but things calmed down quickly. Multiple sources have stated that while Booker speaks positively about TNA and Jarrett during interviews, he's not a fan of Jeff's work as the head of creative. Meanwhile, Booker has a reputation for throwing star fits from time to time. That's directly from Wade Keller and the Torch. What can you make of this report? Do you remember a disagreement with you and Booker? Do you believe that you were maybe interjecting a little too much in matches? And what do you make of the comment that Booker had a reputation for star fits?
When you kind of read that entire paragraph, it's partly cloudy, or it's kind of partly sunny. I think there's a chance of rain, but there's also a chance of sunshine. It's Jarrett micromanaging, but Booker's known to throw some star fits, and they had an argument, but they made up after it was over. I don't have any recollection of me and Booker having, I'll call it, a personal argument, disagreement, having words in our entire career. Has Booker ever been, and I hate to use the word afraid, but that's not our relationship. he would come up to me, not just about his stuff, on anybody's stuff. Hey, Jeff, can I have a word with you? Let's talk about this. Hey, man, why don't we do this, this, and this, and this? I always showed him the respect and heard it out. And he's creative. He cares. He had passion. I think once he got to TNA and was there long enough, I think the realities that we weren't the WWE, and I think sometimes Booker came to work and look, he always did what we asked and he worked hard, but I think the bloom was off, and I think he was ready to go when it was time to go. But Booker's a passionate guy, and to this day, he will, in a positive way, light somebody up with his opinion. But in his reason for doing that is he wants a better product. He loves wrestling. Period. He's grown. You know, look at reality wrestling. I mean, it is a force. What is it? Almost 1 million YouTube subscribers and everything that goes with it. That to me is a testament that Booker is invested in the business in more ways than just wanting to be Booker T. He's always been that way. He wants to dive into the business totally.
Let's talk about a report from the Torch about third-party bookings. It's written in the Torch that has decreased in recent months because the company, quote unquote, jacked up the booking fees for the top names. It was a conscious effort to weed out smaller bookings, and there was a feeling internally amongst most of the top talent appearing on indie shows that it was hurting TNA house show business in some markets. There hasn't been too much griping by the top talent over fewer indie bookings. What do you remember of this? Was this a paradigm shift where you were trying to protect the brand? Or is it just a function of, hey, man, we got them on TV, we got them under contract, so you're going to pay us more money if you want them?
Now, I'm not going to say never. We had this set of circumstances about hurting house shows in other markets. Maybe there was something of that. Some independent promoter wanted them in a market, and we knew that we were coming to that market with a pay-per-view in 4 months. I'm pretty sure we would discourage that to the talent. But as far as jacking the rates up, to my understanding, it was always a mutual, hey, what do you want to charge to go on, you know, to make an independent scene? What do you want for travel? What do you want for accommodations? You know, and it was a collaborative effort, but they set their price. And then as an administrative, like any form of a booking agency does, add on their 10%. Hell, that's just the simplicity of simple administrative costs if we're going to administer all this. So we didn't jack up the price, and maybe on a case by case it discouraged it. But look, again, it's good content to report in a newsletter because it's news.
There's another report from the Torch that says one source pointed out that TNA rarely releases anyone. Quote, Jeff doesn't like to fire anyone. He just doesn't work that way. The source noted that TNA has taken the approach of trying to make unwanted talent miserable enough that they quit on their own. More often than not, they'll fulfill their guaranteed number of dates and simply not renew. I realize that was written where it was made into a negative, but I feel like this is you doing your best to try to honor the contract. And I know that some of our listeners would say, well, that's not fair. But at the end of the day, you're a businessman and you understand that this is the wrestling business. And these guys aren't just coming to wrestle because they love the competition. They're paying bills. This is how they feed their family and keep a roof over their head and yada, yada, yada. So if you made an agreement, hey, I'm going to pay you this amount of money for this number of shows, you're probably going to see that through. And if they're not happy with their creative and want to leave, well, maybe it's a self-correcting problem. Was that the attitude?
Man, when I look back on all of this and really drill down, and we just kind of talked about serving two masters, the pay-per-view world or the television ratings world, that was a ongoing battle. And then on what we're talking about, the talent situation was, you know, when I look at at times shoestring, but there was a lot of times, I mean, just a very, very tight budget. And when you sign guys, it's let me say this, when you sign guys, but when you're writing a show, we just alluded to it, always kind of that bottom 10% you got to churn. But look, I mean, to keep a At that time, we were producing 3 hours a week, 2 hours of Impact and 1 hour of Explosion for international. So we were producing 3 hours and I can remember looking at Explosion, creating that third hour, that, the kind of the talent that would be, I guess you could say, left to book on that. We would come back to rematches and this and that. So I was always, it was difficult with Dallas and Panda and the investor, that you would like, I would love to have the luxury to have 8 to 10 guys that, just a bigger roster. It's so much easier. But when you're really X amount of slots and X amount of talent, sometimes the math just doesn't work. It's very, very difficult. Does that make sense to you, Conrad?
Yeah.
Yeah. Just that was another ongoing battle, that there never, ever, ever was a solution, because I understood the talent. I can't tell you how many times I used to tell Bob and Janice on different occasions, look, I'm a talent. I was, up until TNA started, for 6, 7, 10, 12 years, I was only a talent. I understand what they want. They want to work and they want to get paid, and they're really not bitching. They're just got to pay bills and want to wrestle. And on the flip side, well, we're not a charity. We're not just going to hand out money and not get a return for it. So it was difficult. Another reason why I wanted to run as many live events as possible is to give guy work. Oh, the joys of running a day-to-day business, right, Connie?
Yeah. It's I mean, that's just part of it. I mean, that's part of the business. And let's talk about another part of the business. The Wrestling Observer Reader Awards are announced for 2008, and there's some interesting notes I thought you might find. Bryan Danielson was voted as most outstanding wrestler, and Meltzer would point out that TNA had never expressed major interest in him while he was in Ring of Honor. I found that fascinating. Why was that? Did you not think Bryan Danielson was money when he was in Ring of Honor? Did you just not see it at the time?
He was under contract to those guys, and I believe when he came up for renewal, and I have to, like, I've made my comments on Bryan through the years. He's, if not the current best, he's certainly always been one of the best storytellers. Which is, he can do all the different moves and all that. But so this is 09. Our roster, we just talked about it, was jam full. And he was under contract. So I think it was good for Dave to write, hey, he's wrestle of the year, but TNA's ever even thought about him. Well, he's under contract too.
We got to talk about Ring of Honor. We brought them up. They're going to be getting a deal with HD Net. Was that something that was on your radar? I mean, I know that you're a wrestling junkie and you keep up with that stuff. Had you ever spoken to Mark Cuban or HD Net about something for TNA in all those years, or no?
We hadn't, but I can specifically remember in the creative room when kind of that news came out, that we were all like, hell yeah, the more broadcasters that want to get into the professional wrestling business, the better. Because, for years and years, it was, we'll call it TBS. For years, it was TBS and USA Network. And then, as we move along through the years, oh, wow, UPN wants it. Oh, well, what was ECW? Sci-Fi. And then, because WCW, as we have all discussed, overnight, Jamie Kellner says, nope, Turner Networks are out of wrestling. So we wanted more broadcasters, distributors to get in the game. So it was a win. It was a win for the wrestling industry, which we all liked.
Absolutely. Those same readers of the Observer voted that TNA Impact was the worst television show in wrestling. Second place, believe it or not, was Hulk Hogan's Celebrity Championship Wrestling, and TNA was voted worst promotion of the year. Now, I know that you think a lot of Dave Meltzer's awards. When you win worst promotion of the year, did you get a trophy? Did you put it on the mantle? Did you guys display it at the office, or what's protocol?
I don't recall that, but you know what? As I was reading research, Conrad, it was, to me, well, it's a question. I'm curious, because I think we talked about this last week or the week before. Is Dave made a reply to a tweet about TNA's never been profitable. He knows, he absolutely knows that's a lie. I mean, there's no gray area. We went on Spike. I'm not going to say day one, but it was day one. But yeah, I mean, as far as, but 07, 08, 09, we were very profitable. So my point I'm saying that out is Dave's readers voted us worst promotion of the year. Well, why would that happen? And I'm not saying we did all things right. And
right.
Hogan celebrity, I'm not saying that at all. But Dave's narratives completely translated into his listeners' votes. Should come as no surprise, eh? I mean, it's funny. Now, why Dave has a specific dislike of TNA, I don't know I don't know what drove that, other than Dave did what's best for business. So maybe it's good for him to knock the WWE, the only other national promotion or global promotion outside of WWE. I don't know, but I chuckled. And to your point, I don't believe that trophy or that plaque was in the post-production studio. I don't believe it was in Dixie's office. I don't believe it was in Dean's office. It could have been in Dallas, Conrad, but you're a belt collector.
Yeah.
So if you're a plaque collector, if you've kind of could dive into a couple of group chats and just find out where is the lost plaque or trophy of TNA's award-winning worst promotion of the year of 2009.
I'd love to run that down. I mean, it would be right up there with like the Crockett Cup for me.
No way.
Not really. Hey, there's a big European tour that TNA holds. Opening in Dublin, there's a sellout crowd of 2,000 fans here. Foley's on tour with you. The second night of the tour in Dublin, you pin Kurt in the main event. From there, you go to Manchester. There's 5,000 fans here, and that's got Nick Aldis's debut. He beats Xavier Woods. Dixie Carter even makes an appearance in front of the crowd before the main event, and you're going to team with AJ to wrestle Kurt and Scott Steiner. And the rest of the tour would see Birmingham draw 4,000, Glasgow do 4,100, and an all-time record for London, 8,100 fans. This is one hell of a tour for the company, is it not?
It is. It was, I think, the most lucrative live event tour in our history.
Right.
I think this was the most profitable, best live event run of shows in TNA history.
Yes.
Did you have a question? I mean,
I just thought it was, I mean, listen, I know people like to dunk on AEW and dunk on TNA and blah, 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 but this is a hell of a tour here, and it's not on television necessarily. You're doing a tour, and it's moving thousands of tickets. 8,100 in London, strong. And Meltzer would say, the funny thing is, you probably get 70% of the house show reports from TNA in the comments where it was a great show. Totally unlike watching it on TV. TNA's strength is its wrestling, but you'd never know that by watching their television, where match time is kept to a minimum. It would be one thing if this philosophy was working, but it's a broken record. Ratings are inching slightly upward. Ironically, with most of the key guys who dominate the show, like Mick Foley, Sting, Kevin Nash, Jim Cornette, Jeff Jarrett, and others, rarely even wrestling on the road. But when you consider the ratings are only slightly lower in a 1-hour format on Saturday nights, with far less name talent doing the Scott DAmore booking run, they were doing better consistently on pay-per-view. And I don't see that as an affirmation of the current direction. There is a lot they are doing right, particularly the top heel group and having a lot of good talkers, but there is too much talking, and they book their baby faces like crap to the point where the fans now cheer the heels. It's as if they're taking a page from WCW in 1997 with both what did and didn't work, without really figuring out why it did and didn't, nor recognizing what the end result was. I know you don't always love the commentary, but it is fascinating to see and hear the reports that everybody loves the matches that they see at the house show, but that's not what they see on TV. And I know what I would think if I were you reading that. Well, yeah, why don't you try that same with WWE? WWE is going to load it up with a lot of fun matches, but we're going to get a lot of 20-minute in-ring promos on Raw and SmackDown. How are you reconciling that? I know you're the challenger brand, and I know that you're trying to be different than. Did you think, or was there a conscious effort to, hey, let's try to focus more on story, less on matches? Or did you think, hey, maybe we should be different? Maybe we do need a little more wrestling, because that seems to be working and getting critical acclaim.
Oh, it ebbed and flowed. So what's my comment on the critics, if you will, loving the live events, but not loving the TV? And I think the simplistic mindset that I always tried to have, and again, you can get off base and you can read a few things here or there, or collectively, the narrative can really add up. But for the most part, Conrad, I would kind of go back and say, okay, let's consider the source. The folks that are writing that they love live events and hate the TV product. They spent the money to go see a live event, because you can't report on a live event if you're not there. So they're going to like more wrestling. Okay. It's a barometer, but it's not the end all be all. But you can go look at minute by minutes. You can go to focus groups that are not live event fans, but they are television watchers. And Spike did many of these. I wish I had a camera to sometimes record these, Conrad, because they would put people in a room and have, what do you call that? One-way glass, where you could watch them, but they couldn't see you. And you watch them watching the television show. And these are TV watchers. And they would rate them in 3 different categories. Not the right terms, but hardcore, average watchers, and then casual, whatever it may be. You just had to say, yeah, I'll sit down for this focus group and I'll watch professional wrestling. And it's remarkable on what those groups would come away with. They love the in-ring promos. They love the music. They love the music and entrance. After the match is over, ding, 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 whether it's a 1, 2, 3 or DQ, television watchers love to see what's going to happen afterwards. From bell to bell would be their least liked segment of the television program. So you kind of got 2 different audiences. And so when people write in and really drill down and say, live event was great, their TV product sucked, you kind of had to go, okay, I get that, but let's consider the source.
Sure.
And look, at the end of the day, you kind of look at, we'll call it, let's just say Monday Night Raw. Correct me if I'm wrong, Conrad, but didn't they just do a $5 billion deal?
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I point that out is that is a show that's been on since 93. And here we are 30 years later. And I would, if you drill down on the minutes of wrestling in its totality and the minutes of in-ring or music and entrance and all that, the scales are pretty off. And they're doing something right for Netflix to say, oh, I'll stroke this check for billions of dollars. But I get it. I mean, a wrestling fan wants to see wrestling. That's what live events are for. So it's a challenge, pal. Big time.
Were you not using Doug Williams in a more regular capacity in this era because of travel costs and transportation costs? Is that fair to say?
Singularly. I mean, I love Doug. Great in-ring performer. And I'll say this, he's one of the performers that could do his work, and even in a tag, everybody else's work. He's really good ring general. But at the time, I don't think he had moved here yet. He was willing to commit, but we just didn't want to. That's another thing. Hey, Doug, move on over to America. Oh, you get here. Oh, man, you're going to be living on a shoestring budget. We didn't want to do that to the guy. So it was a difficult balance. Did we want to sign him? Yes. Did we sign him? Yes. Did we give him full-time work? No. It was a challenge.
Let's talk about some things on the TV show. The January 22nd episode did a 1.12 rating, 1.6 million viewers. There's a fun segment when the program starts with Booker and Shane Sewell. Booker's going to offer to make him a driver for the Mafia. Is that the segment you think you had a disagreement with? I mean, this feels like Booker in his element here.
Yeah, no. I mean, my gut tells me if they're reporting on me and Booker having a disagreement. My gut tells me that it would have something to do not with this segment. And I would say something to the fact, Book, I love you, bud, but this ain't even your segment. I don't want to talk about it right now. Man, you need to listen to me, which it would be the give and take of that. But I don't think it was about this segment with Shane.
Let's talk a little bit about Team 3D. They cut a promo backstage in front of a Japanese flag, and we're pretending like they're at the Tokyo Dome. They're not. But they're putting over that winning these titles, the New Japan titles in the Tokyo Dome, is like winning the tag straps at Madison Square Garden. I understand the reference, but did you think this made TNA look less than?
No, I didn't. I mean, I can elaborate. The most simplistic deal was we were never going to out WWE, the WWE. So having that association, we weren't afraid of the word professional wrestling. Hey, that sounds familiar. We wanted to establish that we're working with promotions all around the globe. And the analogy, and I don't know if they're so stuck on Madison Square Garden being a WWE building or just the reference, but you're not going to say, I mean, it's a very topical wrestling to me that translated to the viewer at home, whether you're a wrestling fan or just a casual.
Let's talk about the matches. They're going to change. It's no longer going to be Sting and Bubba and Devon and Kurt. Now it's a 4-way. We would see backstage the fake Sarah Palin doing a promo. Beautiful people attack her and beat her up. They use a keyboard and they break it over. Eventually, security tries to pull them off. Kip James comes out. This is starting to feel a little WCW-esque, maybe a little. The next match is Booker and Steiner just completely beating the absolute shit out of Eric Young and Petey Williams in an elimination match. Sewell is the referee, getting upset that the guys won't just pin the other guys. And Meltzer would say, no wonder the heels are becoming the baby faces when the baby faces are being portrayed as completely ineffective. Matt Morgan and Abyss are trying to mend fences, and Morgan is going to blame his temper. The promo ends with them being best friends again, and Lauren, who's Abyss's girlfriend, and Abyss, they're all going to hug. So you're trying to add another dimension to Abyss, I get, but it still came off a little weird. In the next segment, Morgan turns on Abyss, of course, in a first blood tag match against Beer Money. A lot of stories that we're squeezing into 20 minutes here. Do you ever think at the time, maybe this is too much of the good stuff? In the South, we might even say 10 pounds of shit in a 5-pound bag.
Without question. I mean, when I look back and look, wisdom comes in bite sizes over the time, but less is more in storytelling. And to look, Vince Russo wanted a story and maybe a story within a story in every segment. And there was kind of a constant battle in creative, and not just Vince. I shouldn't say that. Jeremy or Banks or Matt Conway or Dutch or Tenay, whoever in the room, everybody wanted to kind of create layers and try to dive deep into continuity situations that happen, all that. It's just a fine balance. And the Abyss, Matt Morgan story, should we have given it more time? Probably not. Did we give it enough time? Probably, with the amount of stories we were trying to cram in that 10-pound bag. No, it didn't resonate. It was an uphill challenge.
Let's talk a little bit about what comes out of nowhere in the main event of the show. Kurt's doing this promo where he blames AJ for ruining his marriage. Nothing about his match on the pay-per-view being a 4-way, and they're even showing clips of Karen feuding with Kurt. And this had been dropped for months at this point. Were you guys just planning to reintroduce Karen back on TV, or why the pivot? It feels like an about face almost.
I think we were just doing backstory telling, but no, I think at this time there was no discussion about it.
We know there is going to be discussion about the main event. It's Styles losing to Kurt in a tables match and then Pillmanizing AJ's ankle afterwards. And nobody is there to save AJ. So Kurt vows that next week it's going to be the end of TNA. Speaking of things that take place, here's Jim Cornette discussing Kurt versus Samoa Joe from Lockdown almost a year ago. To me, it was what a world championship contest in professional wrestling ought to be. And also, with its MMA influence, it was so vastly different to what everyone else was doing in the business these days. I think they were ahead of the curve on that one. And sooner or later in wrestling, I think you'll see a world championship matches being contested in that fashion. If you can find two guys as good as Samoa Joe and Kurt Angle, whether you can do that or not is another story. And he said he considers UFC to just be pro wrestling of 100 years ago. Unfortunately, they've been able to present our business better than anyone in our business can present our business. I thought that was a fascinating explanation from Jim Cornette and wanted your take on that.
I remember reading specifically all that his take on the UFC. Can you say that quote again?
The one about presenting it better.
Yeah, because
unfortunately they've been able to present our business better than anyone in our business can present our business.
That is such a corny 101. But backing up out of that and looking, and so this is 2009. So UFC still, I don't say young, but their storytelling and their mainstream appeal, just how they presented it, and then him, giving us kudos to the Kurt Samoa Joe, in the creative room, we collectively were like, the only problem with that is that, there's only one Kurt and only one Samoa Joe. Could we present things more realistic and sports oriented and all that? Yes. And that was the fine balance that was it's still to this day to me is a real challenge. I mean, you kind of go back and look, currently at what we're seeing across the fence with the WWE scene, that the real story, if you will, I'll say this, would be Cody working 2 years or a lifetime to gain that. Well, there's also another real story is that The Rock, the world's biggest box office attraction, is coming back into the wrestling business. But put them at the same time, it's pretty apparent we got some issues. And so it's just I think the reason I say that is such a fine balance on the presentation and the story and the talent, and that we resonated with Kurt and Joe in that presentation, but it's not the easy. We knew that was successful. We knew it's successful from television ratings and pay-per-view buys. And it's not like we didn't try it again. It's trying to find that balance. Not always easy, pal. It's subjective.
The next week is the Impact where the Mafia take over. It does a 1.18 rating, 1.6 million viewers. Meltzer would point out after 45 minutes into the show, the viewers started tuning out. I wonder if you drew a comparison to like when the NWO took over Nitro for this. Do you think?
It'd be, when you get minute by minutes,
yeah,
context is king. It's, oh my gosh, the ball game on ESPN just went into double overtime. Ooh, okay. They're getting, turning out in droves, and Meltzer just said 45 minutes in the show, so our fourth quarter hour dropped. Well, okay, the fourth quarter hour drop. What was going on any other show on television? The last 5 to 10 minutes of even a sitcom or a CSI or anything, you build toward the episodic nature of any program. The best 5 to 7 to the last 10 minutes of any show is at the very end. So a wrestling watcher knows, okay, they're almost an hour into their program. We've got a completely another hour. We're going to tune out and we'll come back here in a minute. I mean, I didn't try to read too much into oh my gosh, that quarter completely bottom, unless you saw some talent in there consistently, or it happened every week in that fourth quarter. You just had to, man, take a deep breath and look at that. But that's not easy to do at all. At all.
This show is kind of fun. Booker T is the most entertaining thing on the show. He's doing announcer commentary, a spoof on announcer commentary. Kevin Nash is the announcer, calling himself Chet Lemon. And we also see Scott Steiner doing the ring announcer bit. I mean, this is funny stuff, but I'm wondering again, maybe it's too much.
So, Conrad, you just go ahead. What's your question? I jumped in.
No, I just tag in. Go ahead.
Again, the fine balance in
Yes.
that. And I say this with the Mafia. I've said it over and over and over. Kurt being the ruthless, badass heel, to me, made the most money out of the Mafia. Sting, as the champion, had integrity, liked his peers, respected his peers, but wasn't quite going to go as far as to join in on the gang mentality. So those 5 guys that were badasses, but all of a sudden now you have Chet Lemon, Kevin Nash is Chet Lemon, and Booker T is Black Snow, and Scott Steiner, of all people, being a ring announcer. It's comedy. You know, too much funny, no money, or whatever the saying is.
Money don't draw money. Yeah.
Money don't draw money. And that to me was in a self-contained segment. Yeah, I can get it. It's entertaining. I can hear Vince saying, bro, it's very entertaining. And I would go back and like, yeah, let's let other talent get into the comedy. Let's keep our badasses. And so I think that would be a criticism that is completely valid. Self-contained, it's entertaining. Long-term storytelling, I thought it was outside their characters.
Sharmell is going to interview the referees, Andrew Thomas and Rudy Charles, who were facing Booker. Thomas acts like he's scared to death. Charles, on the other hand, is acting all cocky, saying that he was an amateur wrestler and to watch out when his back is against the wall. I think this is meant to be a spoof on Jim Ross, Steve would write, talking about people's amateur backgrounds during pro wrestling. Surely it was lost on the audience. Charles referred to Sharmell as Mrs. T, which I think is funny. Booker destroys them both in 4 minutes. Sting is go ahead.
On that was not a Jim Ross reference.
Okay.
Matter of fact, Rudy Charles and maybe this wasn't supposed to be, and this is where I think you get Dave or Wade or whatever completely over analyzing anything. They were going to go in the ring, wrestle Booker. We wanted one guy to have balls and one that was unsure of himself, and Andrew and those guys. I remember the pre-tape and with Sharmell, they were all they were great in it. And there is a legitimate story that my man Rudy Charles, very cocky, very confident in his amateur background, and he'll tell the story himself, Connie, that he out of 400 wrestlers, he entered a tournament, and amateur tournament in Evansville, Indiana. Out of 400 wrestlers, he placed third. In his division, there were only 3 wrestlers, but that's just a minor detail that you want to leave out. But no, that's how the pre-tape. It had nothing to do with JR.
Let's talk about Sting. He's going to take on Team 3D in a handicap match, and the story is that Angle booked the match to make Sting look weaker so he could increase his chances of winning the title. Sting, as the heel, is going to wind up working as a babyface because it's 2-on-1. I hope that's as confusing for you as it is for me. Meltzer would point out that all 3 are wearing shirts. Quote, this looked like a nostalgia promotion indie show. 3D essentially just beats the shit out of Sting. And who eventually comes out to save him? Angle, who was supposed to be softening him up. I don't really know what's going on here. The security is stopping Cornette and Foley from coming out and announcing that Hernandez is going to get another title shot. And then the most hilarious thing, according to the Observer, is they do a video feature on the UK tour. They mention the show in London is the largest crowd in TNA history with 8,000 fans. And Meltzer would say, okay, when I first heard the figure, I was impressed because I know TNA usually draws smaller crowds. But after every week on WWE, hearing about tens of thousands of people, when you go on TV and brag about the biggest crowd in history and say 8,000 and you've been in business 6 years, it's like telling people you're minor league entertainment and that downgrades your stars, not for that show, but that you aren't regularly doing numbers like that for big shows. They never should have given a number figure on television. I find that interesting. What do you think of that philosophy? Is that a real complaint or a criticism?
I mean, I think there's some validity there. I think we could have gotten the same point across of, hey, a record-setting crowd in Wembley Arena. I think I think that's a valid point. Context is king, so I don't know exactly why Tanay would say that. But yeah, it's like, other mindsets on when you report on, are you going to, it's like, it's presentation, it's wordsmithing and presentation, which is vital. I'll definitely, there's a valid point there.
Now, of course, this is the show that the Mafia has taken over. Cornette and Foley are going to screw the Mafia by booking Angle in a handicap match against LAX. Hernandez, who just got his title shot back, misses a tackle, flies out of the ring, leaves Homicide to hit all his big moves on Kurt. And then when he tries for the Gringo Killer, Angle gets out, Olympic Slam, and 1, 2, 3. But wait, there's more. The show ends with a video of Samoa Joe with that Umaga style face paint on, telling fans they're going to get to finally see the real Samoa Joe. Meltzer would say, so now they've completely killed off the character it took Gabe Sapolsky 2 years to develop and hand to them, and they're making him a dime store Umaga. Tell me about repackaging Samoa Joe here. Were you in favor of this? I've read over the years that for whatever reason, Vince Russo was not a big fan. Was this his call? How does this come to be?
See, like, I know in the discussions, a dime store Umaga, that was never, ever. There was a ongoing discussion. I was a huge fan of when Joe, and I'm not saying every week, because I knew just the execution of that would not have been the easiest or the best, but Joe, legit Samoan background and family, and I'll call it the dance. I know there's another word from that, but I liked it on occasion. The face paint, the dance on stage. When Samoa Joe is going to kick it up a notch, the one thing that just kind of jumped in my mind, it's Finn Balor and the Demon. When you want to take something to the next level, and I know that's not a perfect analogy, but it's just playing another extension of the Samoa Joe character. So I was a fan of it, but not to be done every week.
Let's talk about the reason that everybody maybe is being so critical of TNA Creative. Wade Keller would say the backlash, which Vince Russo and JArrett need to open their minds to, is that today's fans really are looking for a product of their own, not a remake of their older brother or father's pro wrestling. There are new ideas, or at least much older ideas from successful stretches in the 70s and 80s that could be used as inspiration. But going back to the previous era for so many of their major storylines and angles feels tired. The stars of 12 years ago, which include the boss JArrett, are going to scrap and fight to keep the top spots. But there's nobody with wrestling knowledge or power to change that up except for Jarrett. But I don't sense he trusts his own ability to create new stars and come up with new ideas, much less admit that he's trying to relive the Thunder era with him as a top draw and that it just won't work in 2009. He would even continue, there was a meeting held in the last 2 months that involved Dixie Carter and a few top wrestlers. Dixie said she wanted Jarrett included in the meeting, but the wrestlers talked her out of it. The wrestlers didn't come right out and say it, but there were problems with the creative direction of the company, and they definitely hinted at their lack of faith in the current creative team. However, the feeling coming out of the meeting was they couldn't get through to Carter, who displayed no openness to making the idea of a creative change. Did you hear about this, that perhaps the talent wanted you out of creative? Had you heard that?
Now, we're talking first part of 2009, and there's the luxury of having hindsight being 2020. Well, obviously it's fantastic. During this time, I would have said, the current creative direction is resulting in record ratings. That was the reality. Our ratings kept going up. And the Mafia, and we touched on it earlier in the podcast, was a huge part of that. The storyline was a huge part of that. So I thought logically, Dixie's, it is what it is. But I also know the history of the business in that talent is always going to be unhappy, period. Whether it's, they're probably the most unhappy when you're the most successful. That's the nature of the beast. When you're down, and I'm saying whether it's houses or ratings or whatever, then talent knows that they're not producing, and there's you're kind of all in this boat together. But the more successful you get, everybody wants to take more and more credit for it. So I kind of knew, I knew it was going on, and I knew that from time to time Kurt would be unhappy, and you can run down the list, different people from time to time being unhappy, and Dixie saying she's going to take a meeting. I think the reality was Dixie was putting the pieces of the puzzle in play for her power play then. Now that I look back on it, it's there's a meeting and she's going to say, I wish Jeff was in here. I was never going to be in one of those meetings. She didn't want me in there. And I would also like, what are we meeting about? We're going to meet about creative you don't like. Tell me why you don't like it. Okay. I know why you don't like it. You don't have enough TV time, or you're not winning every match. It's you kind of go down the domino, and that's kind of the nuances of this business, that you got to have an understanding on the vision you're going with. And if you're not producing, then you got to change. But you just don't change because a talent or a couple of talent, like, I don't like this, because again, as folks will tell you, and I'm right in there, if they're self-serving, they're going to want what's best for them and not the company. And I made it very clear, folks. I don't know how many times I said this. The only way I'm going to make $1 above my payoff and my salary is if Bob Carter gets all his money back. So my job every day is to create as much revenue. That is my mindset, to make the company the most money, because that's how I make the most money. It was over and over and over. But again, the hindsight, Dixie was sowing the seeds of the power play then.
There's lots of unhappiness with the talent in this era. We see the Motor City Machine Guns are in the middle of a contract negotiations, and they're pretty frustrated and plan to leave. Do you remember negotiating with those guys, or do you have somebody else handle that?
That would be depends upon when Scott DAmore, what era he was in there or not. When he wasn't around, Bob. Look, so this is 09. So that would be Dixie, Bob Ryder, maybe some others, Terry Taylor, but I was not. I wanted out of that talent contract negotiation I'll say it on a week. We created the talent relations department. Specifically, that's why you do that, is that day-to-day issues with talent and contract negotiations are handled by that department.
We got to talk about Eric Bischoff. He is doing an interview in the UK Sun, and they're talking about TNA. This is 2009. Neither one of us are interested in TNA. It's a small organization that doesn't have very much vision. The best way to describe it is WWE light. There's nothing exciting there for Hulk or myself. He talked about Dixie Carter and said she was a quote unquote nice woman, and quote unquote, I'm sure very intelligent. And quote, the rest of the people in senior management there are not the sort of people we would like to work with. Bischoff says he's been contacted by TNA as well as Hogan, but they didn't want to work with people in the creative process that, quote, couldn't get a job in WWE or shouldn't have had a job in WCW. And he continues, there's no vision for that company. There are people who have never been to the dance. They've never been a part, really, of any of the decision-making process that's led to the success of the industry. Some of them happen to be working there while other people did it, but have never really done it for themselves. They just don't have a feel for it. So that's the reason we won't be there. Now, I'm sure if you don't understand the context of that, you'd say, man, they're shitting all over Jeff Jarrett. Turns out that's not true, bro. When you read this, you just knew, oh, they're talking about Russo, right?
When I read it, and I'm not saying I read it immediately, and again, I don't know how far they were coming off of Hulk Hogan's Celebrity Wrestling. They, and I've always understood the reporter. Hey, Eric, You and Hulk got any interest going to TNA? I heard that Russo doesn't want you around there. I mean, those kind of tee up questions, and even if they didn't go that Eric didn't say anything flattering about you read the quote about anything, but the situation that went down between Russo and Hogan was, and we've reported on this, super stiff. That was, it's just funny how that's in beginning of 09 and a year later, they're all in the room working together. That's the reality. But, did it even say where Eric's comment came from? Like what publication? Because
UK Sun.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, it's old newspapers. Good quote, but I didn't ever take anything, that much to heart.
Well, something I'm taking to heart is that Eric Bischoff and I are going down under. It's our first ever international Starcast, and we can't wait for you to join us. Ballarat, Victoria, Australia. We're coming to see you April 11th through April 14th. Eric Bischoff has been announced, and so has Bret Hart, Mickie James, Shelton Benjamin, Chris Masters, and so many others. Keep up with all of our announcement over at Starcast Events on Twitter. We're announcing new talent left and right because we've got not one but two wrestling shows. Mickie James presents HER, which will be an all-women show, and Bret Hart is bringing the Australian Stampede, a supercard of wrestlers from all around the world. There's also going to be at least half a dozen stage shows, including the one I'm looking forward to the most. It's the first time I've ever been on stage with Bret the Hitman Hart, and we're calling it Hitman, an evening with Bret Hart. We'll be talking about the 30th anniversary of his WrestleMania 10 match with Owen Hart, and yes, you get to ask Bret questions. There's also going to be meet and greets galore. You'll be able to meet all of your favorites, see the matches, watch the shows, and of course, tickets are on sale now, or should I say bracelets? Because you see, this is happening on April 11th, the 12th, the 13th, and the 14th. You don't want to miss it. We're also bringing a handful of my fabulous ring use championships. I say fabulous because, man, I don't think these belts have been to Australia maybe ever. But the Macho Man Randy Savage's actual Intercontinental title, I'm throwing that in my bag. I'm throwing the WCW World title held by Vader and Sting and Ron Simmons and so many others. And oh yeah, the big gold, the same one that Dusty Rhodes held, but Bret Hart held for that matter. But maybe most famously during the Monday Night Wars, the one that Hulk Hogan played air guitar with on Nitro. And how about this? Maybe the coup de grace, the WrestleMania 17 Big Eagle. The same one that Kurt Angle won in his rookie year. The same one that Hunter Hearst Helmsley, known as Triple H, wore. But perhaps most importantly, the main event from WrestleMania 17, The Rock and Stone Cold. This is the Attitude Era belt, and it's going to be at Starcast. Get your pictures with the belts, with the talent, see the matches, hear the shows, grab a bracelet, whether it's gold or platinum. You get all access to all events at starcast.com. That's STARRCAST.com, starcast.com. And I want to mention too, if you haven't already, join us over at adfreeshows.com. Not only do you get the shows early and ad-free, you get to be a part of our live studio audience, including folks like our pal Coach Rosie and Amy Vaughn and Matthew Presley and Christopher North and John Westbrooks and so many of you who come and hang out with us today during the live taping. Shout out to Eric Green and Jeff Hayes and Doug Ritter. This is a community that we've built here, and we're excited for you to be a part of it. You get bonus content from each and every one of your hosts. Plus, you get to ask questions on those bonus content, those bonus episodes. It's all available at adfreeshows.com. That's adfreeshows.com. So, Jeff, we're still a ways away from getting to the pay-per-view. But I'm excited for us to talk about this one because it is a big doggone pay-per-view. We should mention that we've got a lot of moving and shaking as we get here, including, unfortunately, a drop after the Mafia took over. Now we're down to 1.4 million viewers, and this is the go home show. Booker's going to come out on the program with a cigarette in his mouth, and Meltzer is going to say that this is starting to feel more and more like WCW. And I guess maybe this dip is because of the whole takeover of the show before by the Mafia. Maybe it was too much of the good stuff. But there's still a lot of great entertaining content here, including Jay Lethal and Consequences Creed doing a promo, and they're doing fun stuff with Lethal going back into his machismo character, talking about the Rockers and the $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase and Virgil. And I know people are critical of that, saying that's not good for your program, but man, I think a little funny every now and again goes a long way. Mick Foley is going to be on the show, and just say that Jeff Jarrett will be back on Impact next week, not the pay-per-view, but next week. And we also would see that there's a little bit of coverage in the Torch about a press release. TNA is moving to the next hot topic / controversial figure by courting disgraced Illinois governor and offering him a chairman position with the Main Event Mafia. Of course, we're trying to just drum up whatever we can here. And then when we finally get to the show, the folks who actually tuned in, there's only 20,000 buys. It's down 10,000 buys from the year before, and it's down to half of what you did for Genesis with 40,000. But those who tuned in absolutely loved it. 91.3% thumbs up. One of the highest rated shows in pay-per-view history. And it's taking place in Washington, D.C., or at least that's what the original production sheet says. But we know it's actually in the Impact Zone. Do you remember why the pivot? Were you originally thinking D.C. because you had the Sarah Palin stuff, and maybe we just didn't pull the trigger on a building? Was it a cost-cutting measure or something else?
So the month before we were in Charlotte, I believe. Yeah, because that, and so, I don't remember. I know there was a time, I don't know. So it said, I didn't catch that. So we were originally going to be in DC. Okay. But
or maybe you're just pretending. Maybe you're going to pretend you were.
Well, I think
because of the Palin thing,
but maybe a clip. I don't know, but I think somewhere in 2008, maybe even earlier that, we decided we're going to go on the road just to the 4 big ones. But I don't know. I don't recall that. I know the deal with Illinois, disgraced governor, that's a Ross Foreman special. He's from Chicago, but I remember that actually, it didn't get picked up everywhere, but it got picked up different places. So it was enough of a tongue-in-cheek kind of deal that having that disgraced governor and the Main Event Mafia together, and that picture of Booker with the cigarette in there, it goes
hilarious.
Well, but it's does funny draw money. They're our main event guys. We both agreed we like Consequences Creed and Xavier. Creed and Lethal. They're talking their deal anyway. Just reminiscing on all of this brings back so many memories. So, all right, on to the show, pal.
Let's get to it. We got a lot of great wrestling on this show. Again, 91% thumbs up. We got Alex Shelley retaining the X title.
A lot of good matches.
Young. What's that?
A lot of good matches.
Tons of great matches, and this is some of the best wrestling that you guys put on, and wrestling matches matter. That actually might be a shirt. Matches matter.
There you go.
13 minutes and 1 second is the time on it, according to Dave. Easily the best match on the show. Dave gave it 3 1/4 stars. The Torch gave it 3 1/4 stars.
Who's Alex's opponent?
Your boy, Eric Young.
That's what I thought. Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Next up, we got Scott Steiner and Petey Williams. This is a fun story because we know the backstory. Unfortunately, Steiner is not able to do much, and Meltzer would say looked bad much of the way. But Williams is working his ass off, and it's maybe a little tongue-in-cheek. Williams worked his ass off to almost make it decent, and his reward was being let go. Crazy. Samoa Joe's music is going to play. Joe is nowhere to be found, but Steiner is scared of the music. They show Joe on the screen with his new tattoo, and that sets up the next match. Of course, we've got 1 star in the Torch, 1.5 stars in the Observer. We'll get into the match and what happened with Petey Williams when we covered Destination X. But it's clear you're trying to set up Steiner and Joe instead of a program of Nash and Joe, which was the build all along. I'm sure we'll break that down in future episodes. We see Mick Foley come out with Sting. Sting's acting like a baby face. You see Sting with the beautiful TNA World title there. Later, 3D was talking with Sting, trying to tell him to leave the Mafia. Foley said if you give the belt to the winner, he would announce the main event. Foley's going to shake hands with Sting, and Sting said that it meant a lot to him. And he does sort of a babyface promo. It's kind of challenging to book Sting. I mean, would you call Sting a tweener here? Is that the right word?
Well, I mean, I thought that was a part of the lure of the group in that we weren't. And again, something that made Sting successful all these years. He stayed true to that character. So by association, he was a heel, but I still don't want to call him betweener. I thought he was a babyface inside that group.
Let's talk about the next match. Brutus Magnus is going to pin Chris Sabin in 6 minutes and 38 seconds. The fans are doing dueling chants. Brutus Magnus, of course, we know is Nick Aldis, star and a quarter in both the Observer and in the Torch. So it feels like we're really pushing Magnus here, and he winds up doing a job on TV the next day. So I can't really wrap my head around that. What was going on with Nick Aldis? What do you remember of Brutus Magnus, his pay-per-view debut here? And I mean, if you're going to sort of do, that's not really a squash, but Chris Sabin is well established.
Hell yeah. Did we beat him on the following TV?
It doesn't make sense to me.
Well, if he's a babyface, was he a heel or a babyface? I don't know, but I don't know why we would beat him next TV. We'll get into that in a future episode. And I'm curious to kind of peel the layer of that onion back, figure that out, or at least best I can recall.
Awesome Kong is going to beat ODB to keep the Knockouts title, 5 minutes and 39 seconds. They're doing a power match, building to a spot where ODB would slammer. Kong wins the comeback with the implant buster. 3/4 of a star in the Torch, half a star in the Observer. Looking back, with Kong's injuries mounting and Gail Kim leaving, the Knockouts division took a bit of a nosedive here, did it not?
It's so hard to follow those two, period.
Yeah.
We had great characters, but as far as pay-per-view money-making matches, it's really hard to follow that. And we didn't for a while.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. Big shoes to fill. We've talked a little bit about Shane Sewell. He actually got a match here against Booker T. Booker T is going to retain his Legends title, which, by the way, was owned by my now deceased friend Mark Nielsen, and our buddy Belt Fan Dan over on Twitter is helping sell that title right now. So if you'd like to own the Legends title, which at the time a lot of people thought was the most beautiful title in TNA history, it is available. The actual ring used one. Find at Belt Fan Dan on Twitter.
Wow.
Booker is going to mostly stall and walk around, treating Sewell like he's a joke. He's just making fun of Sewell. Eventually, he dispenses of him. Half a star in the Observer, a 1/4 star in the Torch. Abyss and Matt Morgan are going to do a singles match here. And I want to remind everybody, Morgan's working this match a week removed from having a staph infection removed in his shoulder. He's doing the match against doctor's orders. He's wrestling the match with a shirt on. He's very limited. In hindsight, probably shouldn't have done this one. What say you?
Bingo. He wanted it. That's simple. Won the payday. We had built the match. As you said, hindsight, probably shouldn't have been in there. That's simple.
And listen, it's a long match. It was 15 and a half minutes. Maybe we could have done that one a little faster and used that staph infection, but kudos to Matt for trying to gut it out. We're 6 matches deep and the show starts to feel a little snake bit, but boy, it really picks up from here. We got Robert Roode and James Storm retaining their tag titles over Jay Lethal and Consequences Creed. They go 15 minutes and 41 seconds. Smeltzer would say not bad, but probably not quite at the level you'd expect. Wade gave it 2 1/4 stars. The Observer gave it 2 1/2 stars. Beer money's on a hell of a run here. And in the main event, Sting retains the TNA title in a 4-way over Kurt Angle, Brother Ray, and Brother Devon. It's a so-so match, but weak in the main event position. It was largely Angle trying to carry 3 people, with Sting limited due to his age, almost 50, and a bad knee, and 3D being out of shape and having the handicap that nobody believed either could win. But still, they went 14 and a half minutes. Wade was not as big on it as Dave. He gave it 1 1/4. The Observer gave it 2 stars. It's interesting that, on paper, when you go back and you recap a pay-per-view like this, it doesn't look like it's going to be well received. But somehow the readers who did watch it on the Observer gave it 91% thumbs up. Wade would do a post-show analysis and say TNA cannot get away with charging for this kind of a lineup of matches when they give away so many marquee matches on a weekly basis on Impact that are better. The pay-per-view card had one special match, the main event, that stood out above what is normally on TNA Impact, but that is only because the TNA World title was on the line. Otherwise, it featured the same 4 wrestlers who headlined Impact a few days earlier in a standard 2-on-2 tag. What do you make of that criticism that it didn't feel even any more special or different than a regular TV?
It's valid criticism. That's kind of a bit of a running thread, not just this podcast, at multiples, is serving the two masters. And, you think back on, I'll call it territory wrestling, which I know times evolve, but, they had the same main events. And even, during this era, I think you would say, how many times have, pick your talent on WWE, but Orton and Triple H, or Orton and Batista, or whatever, they had the same main event every Monday night, and then you ask them to buy pay-per-view that week. It's the episodic. You got to create stakes. You got to promote it as if this is the big match. It's valid criticism, but it's also kind of how the world works, even in today's wrestling.
Yes.
You're going to watch Raw, SmackDown, Dynamite, Collision, and you're going to see that roster of talents. It's building toward those big matches, but the story on why they're the big match is what matters. It's pretty obvious by the amount of buys. You kind of go back into, oh Lord, and I just had this conversation that dawned on me earlier, and I'll bring that up. How technology's changed now on the streaming, and how the Apple Wallet generation versus 2000, 2008 at 9. Back in these days, you're still hitting buy on DirecTV and on your box, and that didn't always work. And just thank God technology's evolved, and we're out of these kind of pay-per-view transactions.
The final thought from Dave Meltzer. The problem is, when TNA's pay-per-views were doing their best business, it was when they were making a reputation for having can't miss shows. Now, with more stars, far better television, and more viewers, they're generally doing rock bottom numbers. They no longer have the rep for producing good shows, something all their competitors are doing. Plus, the WCW mentality has taken over, because you can have great matches or bad matches and it doesn't matter. You stay in the same place. This encourages people to get cynical and do as little as possible. And the removal of effort and incentive is a killer to the business. And yeah, I can't help but wonder as I read all of this, and I know we've talked about this a little bit through the course of our show, but with the benefit of hindsight, and I mean no disrespect, but do you think perhaps the critical flaw here at times that maybe stunted TNA's growth as far as pay-per-view buys and things like that was relying too much on Vince Russo style of television writing? Because we know in WCW was a television company, not a pay-per-view company. So it was all about the ratings. At least in the WWF, they managed to balance that. We need big ratings to sell more pay-per-views. In WCW, the primary focus was get as many people watching this show, and pay-per-views were kind of an afterthought because it's a television company. Does that same line of thinking wind up doing more harm than good for TNA in the long run?
I wish we could have gotten where it had played out in a way, because let's do some math here. So averaging 40, 50,000 buys, whatever, let's just say, which that wasn't because we dropped to 20, but hypothetically speaking, if we would have gone to 40 to 60,000 buys, so 20,000, like, what would be considered, oh, wow, a considerable growth trajectory here. So, then you take out 40% of each buy is what you get profit. And so that kind of growth, what is that, on a monthly basis? Well, the fact that, where our television licensing number was and what we were trying to increase, there was a lot more money in TV than pay-per-view is kind of what I'm saying. It's a great criticism. It's valid. But the real reality was, if we can get our ratings up, and I probably need to finish the complete thought process of this. So round numbers, 210 an hour, Conrad, 220, 230 an hour on Spike a week times 2. So that's 450, 460. If we could have moved that to 153. So I'm just kind of doing the rough numbers. If we could have increased that rights fee by 100,000 a week. Okay. And so going from 430 to 500, that number. But what we also wanted was that second show. So if we could have gone to a Tuesday night show or whatever it is, we wanted the TV money, Conrad. And that's, at the end of the day, I talk about trying to serve two masters. We leaned into, man, if we can increase our rights fees, that's the ticket. That's the real growth. Dallas agreed with us. We agreed with it. So did we try to serve two masters? Yeah. But for the most part, the television master always won. And it showed. So did that hurt the product in the long run? Well, we kind of know that as Dixie took over and the decisions she made, there was a lot bigger issues than pay-per-view over television. It got to the point she was battling just to get a re-up. And so those, they got completely out of the live event business and then really got completely out of the Spike business. But in the period we're talking here, 2009, the pay-per-views obviously suffered because it's well reported, not just on the opinions, but and the small amount of reviewers that if he got 92% people who liked the show, that was probably the real hardcore of Meltzer watchers. So that's kind of a self-fulfilling thing as well.
Well, next week we're going to be talking a little bit about that terrible end of WCW and the way that television went. We're going to call it the Magnificent Seven. It's the end of your run in WCW before Vince McMahon buys the company. We'll talk about Sid's injury, working with Ric Flair, Dusty Rhodes, and so much more. Get the shows early and ad-free over at adfreeshows.com. Advertise on our program at advertisewithjarrett.com. Get your questions in about WCW in 2001 by asking at MyWorldPod on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Be sure to check out our show on video. Jeff and I are going to be going live on YouTube here in the new year. So far, we've always focused on our RSS. We are going to make YouTube a new priority, and you don't want to miss out. So hit the subscribe button, turn on the notifications bell at myworldonyoutube.com. And we've got lots of new swag and merch available for you over at boxofgimmicks.com, including some now infamous t-shirts. And if you haven't already, throw us a 5-star review if you think we've earned it wherever you enjoy your podcasts. Jeff, I never know what to expect when we click record. We did a deep dive on TNA 15 years ago. Can't wait to talk about WCW from 23 years ago. And I'm excited to see you tomorrow night. As I understand it, you personally are going to beat up Will Ospreay and Okada live on Dynamite tomorrow. You're going to stack them shit up.
Okada, do you know something I don't know?
Well, I don't know. I've just been reading lots of rumor and innuendo. Matter of fact, let's just say this. If Roman Reigns wants it, he can get it too.
You ain't kidding.
Guitar necklaces all around this Wednesday and every Wednesday. Pick up tickets to see your favorite wrestler, Double J, Jeff Jarrett, live and in person at AEWTIX.com. And we'll see you next week right here on My World.
Peace.